The girl is sad because her plush toy is torn. The girl's mother regrets and thinks that the toy can no longer be repaired, so she suggests that the girl throw the toy away and buy a new one. People quickly turn things into trash. They will never be able to value these things as much again. A security guard walks down the corridor and hears a sound, then turns towards the sound. The guard follows the sound and opens the door to a room filled with garbage. Inside the room, there is someone in a hood rummaging through the garbage. The guard gets a little scared and immediately takes out his weapon, ordering the stranger not to move and asking who he is. The guard realizes that the unknown person is a quote-quote violent garbage man who takes out the garbage, putting the beauty of the city at risk. The guy is about to leave, but the guard hits the alarm button, saying that he will not let the guy leave. Several more guards come running to help the guard. They demand that the guy surrender, but he starts throwing garbage at them. While the guards are getting out of the trash, the boy deftly escapes through the ventilation shaft. The guards catch up with the garbage man and start shooting, but the guy deftly dodges all the bullets. The guy climbs the van very quickly, trying to escape. The guards don't stop shooting and eventually hit the guy. As a result, the garbage man deftly jumps over the fence and hides from the guards. The guards decide that they need to find this violent garbage man and catch him once and for all. The boy takes off his hood and, irritated, says that he is not violent. Lively and clean streets of the city. Someone is chatting, someone is playing the accordion for the audience. A bearded man walks down the street and overhears women talking about a rowdy garbage man. He becomes interested, but suddenly the girls notice the man, and he has to leave. The girls find the man's clothes dirty and understand that he is a local. They also hope that he will not appear again. Now we are shown the slums of the city, where there is garbage and dirt everywhere. A rumor about a garbage man has also spread among the residents of this part of the city. Rudo is listening to gossip when Chiva suddenly approaches him. The girl is attacking the guy for going out to collect trash again. Chiva explains that the boy might get into trouble, to which he replies that rich people throw away things that can still be used. Suddenly, the guy's conversation is interrupted. A gang approaches the couple and says that the guys stink. They tell Chiva to stay away from Rudo or the girl will start to stink too. The guys explain that the slums used to be a place where criminals were kept, and all the residents are now their descendants. They all tried to get rid of the bad image, but Rudo's father ruined everything because he killed people. Rudo looks menacingly at the guy, causing him to get scared, after which the gang runs away. As he runs away, the guy shouts that one day Rudo will also follow in his father's footsteps. Rudo doesn't understand why he is being bullied, but Chiwa supports him. She believes that Rudo is a good person. The girl notices a plush toy that Rudo fixed. The guy says that the toy is not for sale and gives it to Chiva. Suddenly, Chiva's mother calls her home and the girl leaves without taking the toy. Later, the boy himself returns home. The boy is met at the door by Legto, who heard the scene with the toy on the street. Rudo is embarrassed, to which Legto says that he needs to express himself more clearly. Legto demands an explanation from the boy where he was walking last night. He also says that the boy does not need to think about how to earn money, since while he is a child, this responsibility lies with Legto. Rudo says he's just trying to express his gratitude. The man teases the boy that if he had been as honest with Chiva, she would have understood and accepted his feelings. While the boy sheepishly makes excuses, the older man notices the wound from the gunshot. The boy takes off his jacket and gloves, and Legto treats his wound. The older one asks him not to go to the dump anymore because it is dangerous, but the younger one says that this wound is nothing compared to the wounds he received from his father. Legto explains that the boy could be sentenced to death for his pranks and thrown into the abyss, like his father was thrown. Therefore, the boy should value himself and what is important. Rudo's hands were black before the boy became aware of himself. The boy's mental state had deteriorated considerably, and it was at that moment that Legto gave him the gloves. Legto starts teasing the boy again, while someone in a mask watches in the direction of their house. Rudo looks at his reflection trying to smile, but he fails miserably. In the end, he decides to go to Chiva, since he still needs to give her the toy. Walking along the road, the guy stops to look at the abyss, which they say is a huge garbage dump. All the trash is thrown into the abyss. People who have committed crimes also find their end in the abyss. The boy's father was also overtaken by this darkness, and the boy is interested in the question of what happens to people who are thrown into the abyss. Rudo is interrupted from his thoughts by Chiva. The boy gets embarrassed and quickly hides the toy behind his back, after which the guys start discussing the abyss. Chiva also says that he doesn't want to see Rudo being thrown into it one day. The girl agrees with Rudo's opinion about the trash, but the guy might get into trouble if he takes risks for him. Chiva notices that Legto is worried about Rudo, since he also likes him, and the boy catches the girl on this word, embarrassing her. Chiva tries to explain, but Rudo becomes very embarrassed and covers his face with a toy. The boy pulls himself together and, embarrassed, gives Chiva a toy. The girl accepts the toy with a smile and says that she is happy, which confuses the guy even more. Rudo was very embarrassed and, not knowing how to react, ran home to quickly tell Legto everything. On the way home, the boy suddenly runs into someone, causing them both to fly off in different directions. The guys silently meet each other's eyes, and the stranger simply picks up his book and then runs away. Rudo doesn't understand what's wrong with this guy, but he thinks he should tell Legto everything, and then goes home. The boy returns home and starts talking, when suddenly he stops in shock. Instead of Legto, who usually greets the boy upon returning home, his lifeless body lies before him. The guy falls to the floor in complete shock, calling out for Legto. The man barely says something clearly, and the guy understands that the man is alive and wants to help. He easily tells him to run. Legto asks the boy to change this world, when suddenly Rudo gets electrocuted. Security guards burst into the apartment and tie up the boy, saying that he will be held accountable for murder. Rudo doesn't understand why he's being accused, to which the guard says that the guy is covered in Legto's blood. The guy tries to explain that he is not a murderer, but they don't listen to him. Meanwhile, rumors about what happened are spreading on the street, and Chiva, having heard that Rudo is a murderer, does not believe the rumors. Rudo is hanged, and his crime is announced, after which he is sentenced to death. The guy doesn't understand how it came to this, after which he notices Chiva in the crowd. He shouts that Legto was killed and the killer must be found, but the girl no longer believes him. She, like everyone else, considers the guy a murderer, and everyone demands that the guy be thrown into the abyss. Rudo responds to the people by insulting them, after which he notices the unknown person in the crowd. The guy is furious and realizes that this unknown person was the killer. At the last moment, Rudo vows to send all people and this unknown person to hell. He vows, with tears in his eyes, to kill everyone. The boy falls into the abyss. As he falls, he is presented with a view of a huge amount of garbage. Rudo opens his eyes, lying in a pile of trash. The guy gets up and suddenly smells something and looks around. The boy doesn't understand what this place is. Something starts approaching him from behind. Rudo looks around in fear, noticing the huge claws and teeth. A huge monster appears before the guy, and now Rudo understands why the abyss is considered the, quote, depths of hell. Rudo is always interested in why everyone is concerned with dirt and crime, but no one thinks about what if they themselves fall into the abyss. A guy runs from a giant pile of garbage, not understanding what kind of monster it is. He doesn't understand how this monster ended up in the abyss when suddenly the monster attacks, but Rudo manages to jump back. The boy accidentally touches something and, looking back, realizes in horror that it is a human skull. The guy is freaking out and telling everyone who sent him here to fuck off. He starts to climb the mountain of garbage, but just before reaching the top, he trips and falls down. Rudo understands that things are bad for him, and besides, the local air is harmful to the guy. He understands that his lungs won't last long and thinks about running away somewhere, but there's nowhere to run. The boy felt sick and vomited. The monster, hearing this, went towards the boy. Rudo wonders if there is nothing he can do and looks at the gloves Legto gave him. He remembers Legto's corpse and decides to take action. The guy is furious and ready to fight. Rudo realizes that he can't just die. The boy resolutely enters into battle with the monster. Meanwhile, a man in a gas mask is watching Rudo's fight with the monster. Rudo runs at full speed towards the monster, shouting that everyone needs to leave the boy alone. The guy runs and hits the monster, but it dodges and then hits Rudo. The boy flies away, but still does not give up, and gets up to continue the fight. Rudo cuts the monster with one blow. The monster begins to disintegrate into piles of debris, but Rudo is unable to move to escape. Suddenly, the umbrella opens, and a pile of rubbish falls to the ground. Rudo hesitantly opens his eyes and sees an umbrella. It turns out that the umbrella is held by the same person who watched the guys fight. Rudo doesn't understand who it is, and the guy in the meantime reaches out and grabs the boy by the scruff of the neck. The mask guy suddenly kicks Rudo and then puts the mask on him. Rudo is surprised and realizes that he can now breathe. He also asks the guy who he is and what kind of world this is. In response, the stranger asks the boy to shut up. Rudo continues to pester the boy with questions, but he asks him to keep quiet. The guy can't take it anymore and yells at Rudo to shut up. He also explains that they're not underground, but that they dumped so much trash on top of where Rudo was thrown. The stranger explains that now, thanks to Rudo, they know where the guys are. A monster appears behind the guy, which shocks Rudo, because he just dealt with it. The guy explains that these monsters are abnormal animals, and it is also useless to hit them and they react to the human voice, so the guy spoke quietly. The guy's umbrella starts to glow. He also notices that he feels better after shouting. The guy opens his umbrella, saying that he needs to clean up. He then points the umbrella at the monster and spins it, creating a whirlwind. Rudo watches in shock as the boy defeats the monster with just one umbrella. Rudo is surprised by the guy's umbrella, after which he notices that monsters do not recover after such an attack. The guy deftly deals with all the monsters. He uses a special technique and eventually defeats the monster, surprising Rudo. A bunch of questions immediately arise in Rudo's head about the guy's technique and strength. The guy insults Rudo and asks if he is still alive. The guy takes off his gas mask and introduces himself as Angie, a regular cleaner. After that, he quickly puts on his gas mask, complaining about the stench. Little Rudo comes home all dirty. When Legto asks about his appearance, he says he just fell. But his guardian doesn't believe him. Rudo explains that he told the boys that the things were alive and they started laughing. Legto asks if the boy fought back and, having received a negative answer, calms down. Legto begins to explain to the boy the meaning of words about living things. He gives a bunch of examples and stops at the boy's gloves, asking him to take care of them. Little Rudo is surprised, after which Rudo himself wakes up. The guy ends up tied up with a chain, which makes him scared, while Angie drags him somewhere. Rudo demands to untie him, as he needs to go home, but Angie can't do it. He also explains that the place where the boy came from is called Heaven here. Angie asks how Rudo is going to get to Heaven. Angie also explains that Heaven is constantly moving, and there are other circumstances that prevent getting there. Rudo is determined to return home and doesn't care what Angie says. The boy starts asking Angie if he knows anything about Heaven and bombards the boy with questions. He also says that he will not shut up until he gets answers. Angie tells Rudo to shut up and agrees to teach him how to live in this world. The boys continue on their way until they finally stop. Angie throws Rudo to the ground. Angie leaves the boy, saying that he is on his own from now on. Rudo is indignant, because Angie still hasn't told him anything. The guy understands that something is wrong with Angie when he suddenly hears voices. People appear. Rudo is surprised to see them, as are they. People are even more surprised when they see the guy's clothes and ask if he is one of the Celestials. Rudo explained that he had fallen from the sky, and the inhabitants were delighted. Rudo asks who they are, but the people don't pay any attention to his question. They praise the boy for staying alive, because only the dead were found like him. Rudo thought that these people were better than Engine, but in the end they put the guy in a cage. People think the guy is rare. They tied his mouth and sat him down so he couldn't escape. The bearded man explains that the bodies of the Celestials are very expensive, and taking a Celestial alive is just luck. The bearded man says they'll make a ton of money off Rudo because they hate the sky people. The bearded man explains that the garbage of the Celestials ruins their lives, accumulating, poisoning the air and creating monsters. He wonders what will happen when people receive a living Celestial. The bearded man also thinks that the boy is thin and decides to feed him. He forcefully shoves some waste into the boy, causing Rudo to vomit. These people believe that the Celestials do not touch garbage, and they also consider the food that is shoved into the boy to be scraps. Rudo, in a rage, bites off the bearded man's fingers along with a piece of meat. The bearded man is in shock, after which, realizing it, he begins to scream in pain. After this, the boy begins to eat the food greedily, shocking people. Rudo says that food is not garbage as long as it can be eaten. The guy explains that no matter where someone is from, these people don't dare just label everyone. Rudo breaks the chains that bind him, continuing to insist that people only talk nonsense and do whatever they want. He says in a frightening tone that he has had enough. People are shocked by the guy's strength, and meanwhile Angie watches everything. Rudo recalls the words that if you take care of things, one day a soul will appear in them. The boy reaches for the chains, which begin to glow. The chains transform under Rudo, filling with his power. People are shocked that there is power in heaven too. Angie explains that those who can bring things back to life are called givers. The bearded man orders the people to kill the boy, and they begin to attack Rudo. Rudo also starts attacking them, but the people try to dodge. One of the guys hits Rudo, after which the kid notices the wheel and grabs it. The guy transforms the wheel to suit himself, which frightens the opponent. Angie is surprised that Rudo can use more than one weapon. Rudo quickly takes care of his opponents, and it's the bearded man's turn. The bearded man is very scared. Just before the attack, Angie stopped Rudo, asking him to calm down and leave the man alive. Finally, Rudo came to his senses, not understanding anything. Suddenly, blood began to drip from his nose. Angie immediately understands that the boy has spent too much power, which is why his body can't take it. The boy apologizes, saying that he just wanted to know if Rudo has any power and agrees to teach him. In exchange for training, Angie asks Rudo to join him, but the boy doesn't want to. A guy asks Angie what he needs through the bracelet, since they don't communicate often. He also asks if Angie has found a gifted one. Angie explains how he came across Rudo. The guy says that Rudo has abilities. Meanwhile, the boy is examined and treated. Rudo reminds him that he didn't agree to all this, to which Angie replies that the boy has no choice. The old man says that the boy is lucky to have survived. The treatment is over, and Rudo thanks Angie for paying for everything. The boy also says that he doesn't have time to join Angie and was just looking for information. Angie replies that the boy can search for information as he wants, but once people find out about Rudo, he is dead. Angie also mentions that this world is not generous enough to give information for free. The boys go to a diner, and the older one notices that Rudo likes to eat. Rudo thought that the abyss would only contain garbage, and didn't even suspect that there was a city here. Angie finally asks the guy's name, and Rudo introduces himself. Angie briefly explains that emotions accumulate here, along with the garbage, which at some point are transformed into energy. Energy creates monsters. Monsters attack as soon as they see a person, and although they live only in the dump, they can also enter the city. Normal weapons also do not work on monsters. Angie says that with the help of his gloves, Rudo will be able to defeat the monsters. He also says that if you take care of a thing, then a thought will settle in it, and they call such things jinki. Rudo understands that the words Legto said were true. Angie also mentions that only a few can extract power from the jinki, and Rudo is one of them. The guy also explains more about the organization of the cleaners. Angie admits that she has no idea how to get up there, but the guy's boss knows everything and can figure out something to help Rudo. The guy also asks who gave Rudo these gloves. The guy explains that his father gave him these gloves, and they are the only reminder of him. Angie tells the boy to take care of these gloves because they have a soul. Rudo thanks Angie for her help, and the elder gives the boy the money he earned from selling his clothes. The guy says that he used this money to pay for treatment and food, which irritates Rudo. It was time for Rudo to get angry. A cat jumped from the roof and stole the bag of money. Rudo immediately chased after the fluffy one and, in the pursuit, snatched a stick from someone. He finally caught the cat, but the man from whom the boy had borrowed the stick came to return it. The stranger rather hostilely demands that his thing be returned to him. At first, Rudo didn't understand why this stranger had come, but then he found out he didn't understand why he needed this ordinary stick. The stranger roughly snatched the stick, after which Rudo noticed a badge like Angie's. It turned out that the stick was a jinki. The guy realizes that this man is a cleaner. Meanwhile, the stranger decides to teach the boy a lesson. The stranger swings his stick at Rudo. He says that if a guy steals someone's valuable thing, he is prepared to face the consequences. Luckily, the blow flies right in front of the boy, giving him a good scare. Suddenly, the janitor calls Rudo by name. It turns out that this janitor heard about the boy from Angie. The janitor introduces himself as Zanka and says that Angie has put him in charge of Rudo's training. The boy explains that he didn't want to steal the stick, but was simply trying to catch the cat. Zanka concludes that Rudo's parents raised him poorly. The guy gets very annoyed, because Zanka doesn't know anything about him to say that. Rudo remembers Legto's words that if Rudo wants to be listened to, he needs to compromise. The guy explains that he didn't intend to steal something so valuable to Zanka and asks for forgiveness. The guy understands everything and also asks for forgiveness for losing his temper. Rudo is shocked because it is the first time he has made peace with someone. Zanki immediately becomes friendly and offers the boy his hand to help him up. He also asks questions about the Rudo Jinka. Rudo notices that Zanki seems to have changed and realizes that it is because of his smile. Meanwhile, Zanki tells him that because of his stick, he was often laughed at. Rudo tries to smile and says that he will help the cleaners. Zanki takes Rudo's attempt to smile as mockery and the two begin to argue. Rudo tries to smile again, but Zanki thinks he's crazy. The boys start arguing until they reach Rudo's goal. Zanki thinks that the guy's goal is worthless, bringing Rudo back to memories. Rudo becomes noticeably irritated and says that he is ready to do anything to achieve his goal. Rudo says not to underestimate him, and Zanki prepares to attack. Zanki also mentions that he knew from the first glance that they wouldn't work together. Rudo agrees and rebates the first thing he comes across, filling it with power. Zanki asks if the boy's jinki are gloves, but then he realizes that the guy's ability is to turn any object into jinki. Now Zanki understands why Rudo was called gifted, but the guy still thinks that the boy cannot compare to him. Suddenly, Zanki disappears, leaving behind his stick. While Rudo is distracted, Zanki strikes, and then another. The guy continues to hit Rudo. He notes that the guy is slow, and thinks that a regular stick will be enough to deal with Rudo. Rudo prepares to attack, but Zanki pins the boy to the ground with one blow. Suddenly, Zanki notices something on his cheek and sniffs it, making a face. It turns out that Rudo decided to use a plunger as a weapon. Now it's Rudo's turn to attack and Zanki tries to dodge. The boy doesn't understand what's wrong with Zanki, but since the weapon works, he decides not to stop. The guys start chasing, and Rudo ends up getting Zanki's clothes dirty. Angie drives up in a car and notices that the guys have already become friends. Apparently, Rudo won the battle. The guys told Angie about the battle, and he started laughing out loud. Zanki demands that Angie stop laughing, while Rudo notices someone's legs on the back seat. Angie tells Rudo that Zanki is now his mentor, as he is the best at his jinki. After which Angie asks when Rio managed to end up in the back seat. The girl admits that she was just curious. Rudo is surprised, wondering if she is also a cleaner. Rio starts pestering the boy's hair, which makes Rudo nervous. In the end, the guys go home to the cleaning staff headquarters. The car drives through the wasteland, after which it enters a tunnel built into the mountain. The guys drive across the entire mountain, after which they finally stop and get out of the car. Rio leaves satisfied, and after her, a stunned and disheveled Rudo. In front of the boys, there appears a large building, which is the headquarters of the cleaners. The guys go inside where they are met by a girl. Rio says goodbye to Rudo and leaves with Zanki. Angie introduces the girl as a secretary. He is about to comment on her ability when the girl suddenly catches two flies with a fork, right in front of Rudo's nose. The girl greets the boy and says that she wants to see the boy's potential for herself. Angie explains that the girl's jinki are her glasses. Thanks to the glasses, she can even see the nature of a person. The girl looks at the surprised Rudo, but sees only emptiness. The girl is surprised, but says that the boy's physical data is quite high. Also, his synchronization with the jinki is impressive. Angie thanks Semiu, after which the guys go to meet the boss. The boys walk down the hallway, and Angie explains that the cleaners are divided into fighters, guards, and support. He also offers to meet them and says that it won't take long. The guys enter a room where there is a crowd of people. They immediately look towards the guys. Angie silently closes the door, then says that there are too many of them and they will talk to them later. After which the guys go to the boss's office. The guy reminds Rudo that he will have to pay for the information. Angie also warns him not to ask the boss about the jinki, since he doesn't tell anyone about his jinki. Rudo collects his thoughts and the guys enter the office. The office turns out to be empty, and a secretary appears behind the guys. The girl says that the boss has left for some time. Angie apologizes to the boy, but unfortunately, no one knows when the boss will return. Rio appears and offers Rudo to watch the cleaners work. The girl says that without the boss's permission, the boy still cannot be accepted as a cleaner, and Rio also wants to know more about the boy. The boys got dressed and headed out on Rudo's first mission. Rio asks the boy to try to keep a close eye on their work. The secretary tells the guys the details of the request. The boy asks about the contaminated area. and Angie says that it is the dump he was talking about. The girl decides to explain to the boy in normal terms. She also says that the place where Rudo fell is a restricted area. There are 6 restricted areas in total, and ordinary people die there immediately. The girl also asks Angie what he was doing in the restricted area, to which the guy replies that he was just walking. Rudo was also told that if he did not wear a mask in the restricted area, he would die in 15 minutes. The boy was surprised because he did not think that people could live in such a place. He wonders if anyone up there knows that people live here too. But the boy's thoughts are interrupted by the desire to collect all the trash and fix it. Rudo asks Rio who the guys are who went with them. The girl replies that they are also cleaners, but they are just support. The guy extends his hand to Rudo to introduce himself, but he squeezes his hand really hard. Rio thinks this guy is awesome. Thanks to his strength, the guy can break the armor of monsters with his bare hands, and the girl thinks it's cool. Meanwhile, the second guy noticed abnormal animals through binoculars. A bunch of monsters started to appear from the forest, causing Rudo to go into shock, not understanding why there were so many of them. The guy reminds that Ryu said that the task was easy, but there is a whole herd here. The girl thinks that everything is fine, and this task is perfect for training the boy. The monsters start running towards the guys, and Rudo panics because they are not calm at all. Rudo thinks they have problems, but Ryu is calm and says everything is fine. The guy thinks they need reinforcements, but Ryu stands her ground. The girl says that there are many monsters, but if she clears them all at once, she will return sooner. Rudo is in complete shock and does not understand how the girl remains so relaxed. Ryu, however, is pleased and says that living downstairs it is important to be at least a little frivolous. Rudo realizes that Enji is just as frivolous and decides that he needs to learn to be frivolous. Suddenly, a huge monster appears, and the guy, afraid, says that he needs to be frivolous. The girl is delighted with the sight of the monster, as she has never seen such an awesome anomalous beast. Ryu takes out her weapon, scissors, and says that strong opponents excite her, while Rudo tries to be frivolous. The girl stands alone in front of a crowd of monsters. Rudo is surprised that her weapon is scissors. The girl decides to take care of the little things first, and then the biggest monster. She throws her scissors into the air, filling them with power. The girl jumps up and grabs the scissors, which have increased in size several times, and begins a general cleaning. Ryu is skilled with her scissors and cuts through several monsters with one blow. She deftly cuts off the heads of monsters and smashes them with her knee. Rudo is shocked, and the guy explains to him that the girl's jinky are her scissors. He also says that Ryu is more accustomed to using scissors as a weapon for her legs. The boy understands that everyone has their own way of using their weapons. While Rudo is watching the fight, a monster appears behind him. The monster starts running towards Rudo, but the support guy reacts in time and saves the boy. The guy deftly put down the monster and then threw it to the girl. Ryu deftly cut the monster in half. The girl tells him to throw her more monsters if the guys see them, after which they get to work. Rudo realizes that even without powers, these guys can weaken the monsters and decides that he will help the cleaners until he achieves his goal. Finally, the guys dealt with the small monsters and it became noticeably cleaner. It was the turn of the largest monster. While Ryu went after the big monster, the guys decide to take care of the small fry and stay away from the battlefield. Suddenly, Rudo notices that one of the monsters is alive. The monster trips the guy, causing him to fall, while the monster is ready to attack. Luckily, Rudo manages to run up in time and protects the boy. Rudo says that he will not become a burden to the cleaners and will not stand aside. Suddenly, the stick with which the boy held back the monster turned into an incomprehensible weapon. The guy fell into a stupor, not understanding how to use his power. Meanwhile, the monster approached Rudo. Luckily, Ryu killed the monster in time and praised Rudo for his good work. The support guy apologizes for letting his guard down. The girl also reports that she's finished with the big monster, but no matter how she cuts it, it doesn't disappear. Meanwhile, someone tied up the bearded man's gang that Rudo had wounded. The stranger asks the bearded man where the celestial being went, greatly frightening him. The guys are shocked that the abnormal beast is immune to the jinky. The girl explains that the vital points of monsters are identical to humans, and if these points are cut, the monsters must die. Ryu decides to cut the monster until it dies. The guys say that they will record the monster as a new species. Rudo wants to say something but stops, thinking about something. Meanwhile, Ryu is eager to fight the monster. First, she decides to give the monster a haircut. The girl skillfully controls the scissors, causing damage to the beast. She ends up cutting off something like hair from his head. Suddenly, the inside of the monster's head begins to glow, and the girl jumps off the beast. The monster starts attacking the ground, which surprises Ryu. The guys realize that they can get hit. The ground begins to crack, and Rudo doesn't have time to jump away. The boy starts to fall into the ground. He doesn't understand what he was counting on because he can't even use his jinky properly. Luckily, Rudo is grabbed by a support guy and pulled to the surface. The boy picks up Rudo and runs with him. He asks the younger one to get ready and run. The monster starts to growl and appears behind the guys. The girl immediately understands where the weak spot of the abnormal beast is. Taking advantage of the moment, she jumps into the monster's mouth and attacks it. The monster starts to fall apart, and the guys ask if Rhea really killed the monster. The girl says that she pierced it, and it died. The guy notices a stationary knife in the girl's hand, which is apparently a jinky. They don't understand how a jinky could turn into an abnormal beast. The young man walks down a long, dark corridor. He yawns and rubs his tired eyes. He hears a strange noise behind the door and swears quietly. People are having fun behind the door. They are drinking alcohol, eating, playing. Zanka squints irritably. He notices a girl with a ponytail in a top and short shorts. He approaches her and asks what the hell is going on. The girl reminds him that it is supposedly night outside. They threw a party to celebrate Rudo's arrival in the netherworld. The boy sighs, that's it. He bets that all these guys came here to drink. The girl shrugs. Everyone relaxes in their own way. The young man looks around and sees a man sitting alone in the corner. This young man with blonde hair has his head buried in the table. An all-consuming aura of despair is spreading around him. This is the hero of the occasion, Rudo. Zanka notes that the hero of the occasion himself doesn't seem particularly happy about the party. Ryu, a girl with a ponytail, muses that he must have failed to properly use his jinky during yesterday's mission, which is why he's been so down since then. The boy comments that it sucks. He asks about yesterday's mission. Zanka heard that there was a strange, abnormal beast. The girl confirms these rumors. Unlike normal abnormal beasts, this one had a different core, and this core was a thing. Zanka wonders, the thing that can become a core, could it really be a jinky? Ryu nods at the boy's question. They are quite tense at the fact that an abnormal beast can appear from such a power. Ryu smiles and states that she didn't know what to do with this information, so she just left it all to the management, then went home and got some food. She adds that Enjin and Semyu will also be coming here after they finish their discussion. Zanka exclaims in surprise, Enjin will come? Meanwhile, Rudo continues to lie face down on the table. He stares blankly at his hands. The blonde man pulls out his chair and sits down at the table with Rudo. Another day is over. The man notes that he has not yet introduced himself, so he gives his name, Gris Lubion. The boy also quietly gives his name, but the man replies that he knows it. Gris notes that he did a good job yesterday. Rudo is silent for a moment, then admits that he did nothing. However, Gris reminds him that he protected Follow from the anomalous beast. Rudo doesn't understand who he's talking about, so the man points to the support guy with the goggles. But Rudo still thinks that he did nothing special. After all, he couldn't use his powers anyway, and Ryu and that man had to save him. When he was up there, it was the same. Rudo easily lost his cool and started fights, and Legto had to deal with the consequences. After saying this, Rudo stares blankly at the table. Rudo adds that he needs to get back up there as soon as possible. He can't change. Someone might get hurt if he saves him again. He can't even live up to anyone's expectations. Rudo clenches his hands in his lap. However, the next moment he hears the man's words, which make him look up in shock. Gris thanks him. The man explains that those who see them, the support, for the first time usually look down on them, thinking of them as weaklings, with no abilities, or a burden to the cleaners. Some of the current cleaners thought the same at first. But Rudo seems to be different. The boy continues to look at the man questioningly. Gris asks him to look at the dark-haired man, namely, Follow. Follow joined the cleaners to exterminate abnormal beasts. But he doesn't have any special powers, so he can't kill them. That's why he's currently trying to develop his important item so he can become a giver one day. Yet ever since he became a support member, Follow has always said that he will continue working in support even if he becomes a giver, and will make those who look down on him choke on their words. He's doing everything he can so that one day that will be possible. Gris turns to Rudo again, putting aside his desire to become stronger and live up to expectations. What does he really want to do? The boy asks tensely. Gris explains that before all this happened, there must have been a moment when he told himself that this is what he wanted to do. Rudo frowns thoughtfully. Gris asks him to remember this moment and go back to where it all began, and then the way to make his goal possible will come by itself. Gris reaches out and ruffles Rudo's hair, asking him not to lose confidence in himself, even if he has stumbled. After all, the young man is still alive. Tears well up in Rudo's eyes, but the next moment a young man with a tattoo on his neck pounces on him from behind, sighing that he is tired. Rudo exclaims in surprise, noticing Engine, who asks if he hasn't eaten anything yet. Ryu, the girl with the ponytail, nods. Rudo, as the hero of the occasion, would do well to eat something, otherwise all the food will run out. Zanka agrees, and Ryu will eat the most. Gris stands up and calls Rudo to eat his fill with everyone else. The young man looks up at him. Eventually he gets up and follows everyone else. Another location. The man is writhing in pain. Blood is pouring from his nose. He desperately asks what this man wants from him. He has already told him everything, absolutely everything he knows. The man begs him to help. The mysterious man smiles madly, agreeing. The next moment, he seems to drink the essence of the beaten man. The mysterious guy grins. White hair with black tips, dark hands around his eyes, a celestial with the abilities of giver. A wonderful souvenir awaits him. The girl with the short haircut clicks her heels on the floor. She pushes her chair back and sits down with a sigh, closing her eyes. It is Semiyu, the cleaner's secretary, but she is distracted from her rest by a phone call. She picks up the phone and greets the person she is talking to. They are given some request. So after a while, Semiyu turns to the cleaners, telling them about a new request. All the cleaners listen to her attentively, and one of them asks a question. This is Zanka. He asks why they need to take an intern with them, referring to Rudo. He explains that yes, he is Rudo's instructor, but that Zanka will only officially become one when he is accepted as a cleaner. Rudo is not one of them yet. The girl with the short hair explains that she called Rudo because of one particular request. A merchant was passing through a contaminated area and was attacked by an anomalous beast, which took away his important cargo. The customer would like to ask the cleaners to get rid of the beast and return the cargo. This is the request they received. And the peculiarity of this case is this. The cargo is a living person who fell from the sky. The appearance of one celestial after another is quite an unusual phenomenon, so it was decided that a celestial like Rudo would be useful in fulfilling this request. In addition, Rudo would be able to find information that would help him return to the top. The boy tenses up. Gris addresses him, noticing his uneasiness. Rudo has a lot on his mind right now, so it's up to him to decide whether he goes or not. Rudo looks at his hand thoughtfully. He can't use his jinky properly, and he might become a liability again if everyone has to protect him. Rudo clenches his hands into fists, but if there's any information that can help him get back, he'll go without hesitation. Semiyu notes that she would like Engin to go with them, but he can't because he has another job. Besides, Zanka is with them, so everything will be fine. That's what Engin said. Hearing the words, Zanka's eyes widen in disbelief. Engin acknowledged his strength. They walk down the street, surrounded by destroyed buildings and signs. They put on gas masks to avoid inhaling toxic fumes. Zanka notes that they have a job to do. They must give it their all. Rudo turns his attention to Gris and asks why he doesn't have a weapon. The man explains that he has a knife for self-defense, but he mostly fights with his bare hands. He is more used to it. One of the cleaners also adds that Gris has a special amulet. He prays for everyone, so that the cleaners remain safe and sound after each job. Gris is indignant. Why did he tell him? Rudo mentally notes that Gris is a very kind guy. Gris shows off his amulet, a hamsa. He calls it just a cheap trinket he bought at a nearby kiosk. There's nothing wrong with praying, so he doesn't see a problem with it. The cleaners exchange glances. Suddenly, a voice comes from behind them, which scares everyone very much. It is the dark-haired girl. She is the one who sent them the request. And she is here to show them where the anomalous beast is. Rudo starts to worry when he sees her. He immediately bombards her with questions. Was there really a celestial there? Where did she find him? Did he tell her anything? What kind of person was he? The girl replies that she found him by accident while transporting goods and then took him into custody, but he was unconscious, so she couldn't ask him anything. She is also worried about this celestial, so she would like to save him from the abnormal beast as soon as possible. Rudo asks warily if the girl hopes to make money from this celestial. The girl immediately waves her hands in denial. Of course not, she is really worried about him. She can only say that the celestial has aroused her interest. Zanka wonders. Abnormal beasts always attack if they spot a living person. It is unlikely that he is still alive. Why would an abnormal beast suddenly kidnap a person? Zanka frowns. There have been quite a few strange mutations lately since he arrived here. The girl points to a dilapidated building with broken windows. Rudo asks where exactly the beast is, and the girl explains that it ran inside. Rudo looks at the building. With determination, the celestial is the same as him. They enter the gate, looking at the ruined interior. Zanka asks everyone to be on guard. They don't know where the anomalous beast is hiding. Suddenly, they notice something near the far wall. The girl immediately pushes Rudo in the back, saying that there is a celestial there. They must hurry before it's too late. She pushes the cleaners again, shouting that they need to hurry up. However, the guys are indignant. Why is she rushing them? This abnormal beast can be dangerous. Rudo freezes when he sees what's there. It's not a person. There's a small doll sitting on the chair with her eyes wide open. The girl keeps screaming that it's a celestial. One of the cleaners steps on a shaky surface. The floor beneath them collapses, and they all fall into the hole that appears in an instant. The dust gradually settles. Rudo winces in pain as he tries to rise. What happened to the floor? It suddenly turned into mud. The girl asks if they are okay. Gris replies that everyone is safe and asks what this place is and where the kidnapped person is. The girl immediately starts frantically pointing somewhere, but suddenly the girl's face starts to blur like mud. She points at Rudo, causing him to widen his eyes. Two people with balls of light appear from the darkness. The girl continues to point at Rudo, calling him a celestial with the powers of a giver. Zanka nods to himself, I see. That's why it all seems strange to him. These purple lamps, they lured them into a trap. These are vandals. They, looking at them with lifeless eyes, categorically declare that they are taking the celestial. Vandals are, simply put, bandits. They were originally just a bunch of thieves, but a few years ago they became more vicious, and the janitor heard that they were involved in some questionable experiments. And each of them is a giver. Gris watches the vandals tensely. He turns to the boys and orders them to find a way out. Folo and he will accompany Rudo. But there may be other vandals here, so he asks them to be on guard. Gris apologizes to Zank as he leaves the vandals to him. The young man reminds him that it is his job to deal with the trash. They turn and run. Rudo shouts that he could deal with them, but they tell him that these are not the same kidnappers he met before. Gris explains that they need to keep their distance anyway. They don't know what kind of power the vandals are using. Rudo tuts, only her again. Zanka stops in front of the vandals. He addresses them, saying that they, the scum, still won't calm down, and now they're chasing after the Celestials. Well, he knew it was only a matter of time before they caught wind of it, but Zanka didn't expect it to happen so quickly. Rudo could bring them a huge pile of money that would allow the Vandals to live happily ever after. One of the Vandals smiles terribly and declares that they don't need this boy for sale. They want to know more about the Celestials. Is it better to get information from the Celestial himself? For example, how did he manage to cross the border alive? Zanka mentally notes their question. But he doesn't care about the sky anyway. After all, this request was just a trap to lure Rudo. And there are no abnormal beasts here. Vandal grins. They may not have anomalous beasts, but they do have mud dolls. Behind the cleaner, smiling creatures materialize from the floor. Zanka realizes that the creepy lady who brought them here, and the ground that collapsed beneath them, were all the abilities of the Vandal in the hat. The young man clutches his staff. Without turning away from the enemy, Zanka swings her hand, destroying several dolls at once. Something so soft shouldn't be that hard to destroy. The Vandal laughs madly. It's not that simple. Among the dolls, there are some real ones. A man appears from one of the dolls, preparing to attack the young man. He strikes, knocking the boy back. The man stands up and teases, because to let his guard down and forget about him is so stupid. But the man doesn't blame him. Zanka usually fights with those huge abnormal beasts, so he's not used to small people. Zanka frowns as a large number of mud dolls circle around him. Vandal suggests they play a game before the cleaner dies. One of the mud dolls gets behind Zanka, but he manages to dispatch it with his staff. A fist emerges from one of the dolls and attacks Zanka in the side. The boy curses and immediately attacks back, but is kicked in the back by a man who emerges from the doll behind him. Zanka drops to one knee, trying to support himself with the staff. He grips his staff furiously and swings it. The vandal controlling the doll smirks. She forgot to mention something. At this point, Zanka slips in the mud. The vandal had made the ground sticky in advance. The cleaner slipped and fell. The vandal continues to grin. Zanka can of course try to destroy everyone with his big long stick. But then he'll get stuck in the mud more and more when he moves too much. Of their current team, he is the only one capable of fighting. And if the vandals immobilize him, victory is theirs. So let the young man dive deeper and deeper, and in the meantime, they will capture the celestial. Zanka curses. The vandal's self-confidence irritates him, but while they chatted, Zanka remained silent and watched. The vandal girl used her jinky shovel to manipulate the dirt, and the guy used a kind of jinky to beat him up. Zanka initially thought so, but now he realizes that he was wrong. The man beat him with his bare hands. Now, his feet, as Zanka had time to notice, he was wearing something resembling snowshoes. And he remembered that before she had summoned her mud dolls, he had crouched down and done something. Zanka had heard that snowshoes allowed one to walk on unstable ground. Therefore, he was chosen as her partner because he could not get stuck in the mud. Zanka smiles contentedly. What a perfect combination the OGI have formed. The Vandav's faces distort with rage. The girl screams that he is trying to talk them out of it. His situation has not changed. In fact, it has even gotten worse. Zanka quietly replies that he is not as experienced in fighting people as they are. But he knows his jinky well. Zanka knows its weight, its smell, its feelings, and even asks it about its mood. He listens to it non-stop and takes care of it every day. How much force to use and how it feels when Zanka swings it, where to swing it, and in what direction. Zanka knows all of this. And having told him all this, he has not mentioned one more thing. Zanka confidently states that she can do it. It's as if projections of each doll appear before Zanka. He looks at each one carefully, clutching the trembling staff. And he sees a doll that is not empty from the inside. That's where the enemy is. Quickly, the young man swings his staff, striking each of the vandals. He turns to them. Their overconfidence is what led to their defeat. However, while Zanka is distracted by the vandals, a vandal with dreadlocks appears behind him and whispers that the young man's self-confidence has also let him down. At this time, the other cleaners. Rudo notices that the sounds have stopped. They find an emergency exit and run to it. They open the doors and look around. Maybe they can get up without any problems. But they can't contact anyone from here. They need to go upstairs and call for backup. Suddenly, they hear footsteps and decide it's Zanka. So they stop to wait for him and ask how he's doing. Gris exhales. It looks like he's dealt with the vandals. He asks if Zanka is hurt and what happened to those vandals. The dark-haired boy exhales, bending over. Then the boys notice that this is not their friend. The vandal straightens up with an exhalation and looks down at them, pointing his finger. Gris tensely asks who he is. The vandal points at them for a while longer, then suddenly disappears from the spot where he was standing. He ends up on the wall next to the door, next to Rudo, whom he immediately recognizes. Rudo is the same celestial with the abilities of the giver. Vandal reaches out and destroys the place next to the door. With this blow, the vandal blocked the exit. He drops to the ground and walks towards them. At this time, the guys clear their throats from the dust raised by the blow. Gris swears it's another bandit. Vandal starts talking. So, the Skyman is now with the cleaners. And now capturing the Skyman means going against the cleaners. He's too late. The vandal admits that he got a little lost, and while he was wandering, some guy had already taken out the other guys, and he had to spend a little time on him. Gris realizes that it was Zanka. He asks if there was another janitor where this vandal came from. What happened to him now? However, the vandal ignores him and immediately turns to Rudo, because there is one person who really wants to talk to him. So the man will take it. He reaches out and takes the gas mask off the boy. He doesn't need it, because there are no abnormal animals here. Rudo sternly asks what he did to the cleaner with the stick. Vandal chuckles. The young man talks about that idiot. He tells them not to worry. because he is always kind to those who are strong. He simply put him to sleep and did not kill him. But his poison could well have been too strong for that janitor. Vandal turns to Rudo again. If he just goes with him, it won't hurt. The Vandal's hands grow nails. He asks what the young man chooses. However, Follow and Gris are already rushing to attack him. Vandal finally pays attention to them. Vandal leans back and dodges their fists. He leans back and lies on his back, kicking at each one. Follow notes that he is strong. They stand not far from the enemy. The Vandal's hands grow claws again. Hearing Follow's words, he declares that he is not strong. Gris shields Rudo in a protective gesture. He will definitely protect his comrades. Whatever they face, whatever it takes, Gris will protect them. Vandal stands up. He's heard of those jerks the janitors call support or something. A jerk wants to protect someone? Gris goes out to meet the Vandal. Rudo calls out to him worriedly. The young man tries to dissuade him. Because he can't handle him with his bare hands, he must retreat. Rudo continues that Gris doesn't need to protect him, even if he is alone. However, Gris is determined. Vandal turns to the Celestial. He doesn't want to upset him, but Gris is already dead. The next moment, the man's chest is pierced by Vandal's claws. Rudo's eyes widen in disbelief. Vandal notes that it's nothing to worry about, because worthless people like him are useless. The Vandal stabs the man through the chest, staining everything around him with blood. With despair, the young man watches as the amulet he recently saw on Gris falls to the ground, stained with blood. Rudo is overcome with various emotions as he watches Gris being pierced by his opponent's jinx, the image imprinted on his retinas. He watches in despair as Gris's Hamsa amulet falls to the ground. The young man reaches out to catch the amulet before it disappears into the darkness. Rudo is lost in his memories. A strange noise is heard in the room. A dark-haired man with a beard comes down to see what Rudo is doing. He sees a little boy, Rudo, sitting against a wall, banging his head against it. He runs up to him and pushes the boy away from the wall, yelling at him to stop. Rudo turns his head towards him, blood running down his forehead and nose. Legto's eyes widen. He loudly asks why Rudo is doing this. The boy falls to the floor and admits that he is doing this so as not to harm people. Legto said that he can't do this. Legto purses his lips. Even so, why would he hurt himself? He asks cautiously. The pain in Rudo's hands should have eased by now, and that's why the boy has made it his goal not to run into people, right? Legto asks him to tell him why he did it. Rudo replies, nothing. In the silence of the gray, empty room, a young man's quiet voice is heard. He has nothing. Rudo, looking emotionlessly at the ceiling, continues that he has nothing and never had anything. He only feels disappointment all the time. There is something disappointing, but the boy cannot express it in words. Legto nods sympathetically. It's all clear. He brushes the hair from the boy's bloody forehead. Rudo thinks his parents abandoned him, which is why he feels worthless. Perhaps the lack of ability to do anything about it has become a frustration over time, and Rudo still hasn't figured out how to fix it. The boy wonders distantly what worthless means. Legto stands up, and he promises that they will go outside after he fixes Rudo's head. He explains with a smile that one of the reasons the boy feels he has nothing is because he hasn't found anything he likes or something interesting to do yet. So Legto suggests they go for a walk and do some things. Little by little, they will find something that Rudo likes. They will do it, and little by little, this empty, lifeless room with gray walls will be filled with his favorite things. Rudo carefully rises up. With a smirk, Legto asks him to promise what the boy will say when he brings his favorite girl here. Eventually, they go outside. They walk down the street. They go to the library to look at books. They feed the pigeons. Legto tries to play ball, but the boy just stands with his back to him. The man also tried to teach Rudo how to cook, but when he was about to cut a vegetable, he cut it along with the cutting board. Legto thinks it's not that the boy didn't like anything, but he never showed any emotion, like, that's it. However, this is only the first day. This is only the beginning. Suddenly, something catches Rudo's attention, and he asks what it is. Legto turns around and explains that this is the citizen's trash can. Rudo's eyes widen. He sees a man and a box with someone's head sticking out of it. The boy jumps up and runs towards the trash can. He opens the box and looks at what's inside with wide eyes. Legto asks what he is doing all of a sudden, but then he falls silent in surprise. Legto watches in surprise as Rudo begins to cry loudly, clutching the head to himself. Sitting down carefully next to her, the man asks how he feels. Crying? Rudo replies that he can't believe they threw it away, it's only broken a little bit. Continuing to cry, he shouts that it is not even finished, it is a poor thing. Rudo screams that he wants to fix it. Legto carefully points out that this isn't just some self-projection, and Rudo has a knack for finding value in discarded things. Present. Rudo catches Griss's amulet, causing it to glow in his hands. He glares at his enemy. The dreadlocked vandal looks at the boy in surprise. This explains why he couldn't use the jinky that time. Griss is bleeding from his mouth, but he still chuckles softly. They were wrong. Rudo's ability does not turn any object he touches into a jinky. The amulet in Rudo's hands breaks into several pieces. In fact, he has the power to release the value of the thing he touches at full power. An enlarged symbol, which was depicted on Griss's amulet, materializes behind the young man. The dreadlocked vandal watches the proceedings intently, then whispers that it pisses him off. He turns to Rudo with a smirk. Are these his jinkies? He has no idea what he can do or what he's doing. Saliva forms on the corners of his lips. Follow at this time runs up to Griss, asking him to hold on. Rudo closes his eyes. He remembers how Griss once reminded him of what he really wanted to do. If it weren't for the words he said to him, Rudo would have lost his temper again, as usual, and would have been of no use. He frowns and firmly declares that it will not happen again. The young man addresses the vandal. He rejects everything he said, and he will accept everything he rejects, and so he will beat the crap out of him. Griss and Follow look at Rudo in surprise, and the vandal calmly notes that the young man seems to be genuinely angry. And he adds that it's wonderful he likes those who like to fight, and also strong grievers. Long claws appear on Vandal's hands. He says his name. His name is Jabber Vongar. With a smile, Jabber says that he will play with him first, and then take him home. He also asks the Celestial to introduce himself. Rudo states his name and calls the vandal a fucking bastard. Jabber grins widely. With a wide smile, he suggests tearing each other to pieces. Meanwhile, Follow tries unsuccessfully to stop the bleeding from Griss's wound by pressing his hand on the wound. At this rate, the bleeding will not stop. Griss clears his throat and slowly reassures him that he will be fine. He thinks. It seems that last time Rudo was unable to use his jinky because he was impatient and angry, and also with other emotions that interfere with the nature of his jinky. But now the boy has nothing to worry about. Jabber settles himself on the wall and looks at the boy, letting out a disappointed sigh. He thought the boy was much more in the mood for a fight, but he didn't even budge. Does Rudo not take their fights seriously? Rudo remains standing. He tells Jabber to attack if he can, calling him a piece of shit again. Vandal grins madly. Jabber reminds him that he has a name, so let Rudo call him by his name. He orders him to repeat after him. With a crazy smile, he walks towards Rudo, saying his name. The boy stretches his hand forward, and there is an explosion. Jabber looks at the empty space in front of him in surprise. He calmly asks why Rudo just dodged. It's so boring. Jabber turns to him and addresses him. Maybe they will fight already? What will the Celestial say to this proposal? Jabber makes several attempts to attack the boy. However, Rudo simply dodges, not even trying to parry the attack or attack back. Jabber stops and asks what happened. Did the Celestial get hurt by his attacks? Rudo explains that Griss prayed to this amulet so that everyone would return safe and sound. Unharmed means not injured. For example, to avoid injuries, you need to strengthen your defense. Rudo imagined it like this. He points at the vandal. The Skylord imagined it as, I hope the enemy's attacks don't reach him. Jabber nods, he understands, so his ability is defense. How convenient. However, his attacks may not reach him, but Rudo can't attack either. Rudo calmly asks, didn't he notice? He avoided Jabber's attacks without moving an inch. Rudo explains that it wasn't him who moved, but Jabber. Vandal doesn't understand what he's talking about. Jabber goes to attack again, but Rudo holds out his hand towards him. This means that the boy knows where the vandal will be next. This amulet cannot be used for attack because it embodies the prayers of Griss. That's why Rudo will use Griss's weapon. The boy clenches his fists. Swinging and hitting his opponent in the face, Rudo declares that he will beat the crap out of him with his fists. The Vandal is unable to stay on his feet after the young man's attack. He is thrown back several meters. He straightens up and looks at the Celestial. Rudo is determined to fight. Jabber smirks. He made a move, but he has that menacing look and ability, but the boy still attacks him with only his bare hands? And Rudo is a pain in the ass. Crossing his arms, Rudo reminds Jabber that he'd play with him before he took him home, so he's gonna hang out with him until he beats him to a pulp. Rudo calls him a fucking bastard again. Vandal smiles sweetly. Can Rudo speak without adding words like fucking bastard? That is, Jabber is the one who will be beaten one-sidedly. Will the young man not be tormented by his conscience for harming people? However, Rudo resolutely replies that he will not if he beats only him. Smiling, the Vandal hurries to attack Rudo with his claws. Then, everything is fine. Rudo swings, and before Jabber can attack him, he lunges, hitting his opponent in the stomach. The Vandal grins madly as he is knocked back. He quickly gets up and attacks again, his claws cutting through the stone pillars as he goes. Using the force, Jabber launches debris towards Rudo. The young man covers his head with his hands, protecting himself. And the Vandal hides behind one of the boulders, quietly appearing next to Rudo. However, the huge eye on the creature looming over the boy sees him. Jabber realizes in shock that the thing has noticed him immediately. Rudo swings his fist towards the Vandal. The dust settles after the blow. Jabber turns over and slithers away, avoiding. They stand opposite each other. Jabber chuckles quietly. With a sudden, quick jerk, Jabber changes his position several times. With a crazy smile, he rushes towards Rudo to attack, but the young man already sees him, preparing his fist to strike. Time after time, Rudo strikes the enemy, leaving no chance for a counterattack. Attacking the Vandal once more, Rudo yells at the fucking bastard to calm down. The force of the blow sends Jabber crashing into the wall. He sits against the wall with his head down, chuckling quietly. Rudo turns to him and asks him to give up already. However, the Vandal continues to grin. Jabber smiles contentedly. He hasn't felt this good after a beating in a long time. The boy must really enjoy beating the crap out of people. Vandal smiles madly. He wants the Celestial to feel this feeling too. And by the way, he noticed something too. That Jinky of his has the ability to detect hostility and deflect Rudo from attacking. Is he right? Rudo looks at him in surprise. Still smiling madly, Jabber explains that it's because of the debris. He noticed this when he threw debris at Rudo to distract him. The thing didn't react to things that weren't hostile, or rather, hostile intent. Rudo asks, "So what?" Jabber holds out his clawed hands. His Jinky, Mankira, contains a powerful neurotoxin in its right claws. The boy still looks at him questioningly, unsure of what the Vandal means. Vandal chuckles loudly. Rudo looks at his laughing opponent in shock. What is he doing? Jabber admits that it really is a lousy feeling. It hurts quite a bit. He's about to pass out. And if it does pass out, it will make him violently attack the boy. With a satisfied but mad smile, Jabber adds that he wonders if Rudo's Jinky will consider him hostile. He wants to find out soon. And the next moment, the Vandal loses consciousness. Rudo watches the Vandal's lowered head tensely. Suddenly, Jabber raises his head, his eyes filled with rage and madness. His claws grow longer, and in his rage he uses them to destroy the wall behind him. Jabber grins as he is surrounded by flying debris. Rudo watches in shock as the Vandal continues to laugh, sweat dripping down his face. Jabber doubles over, and then he straightens up abruptly, screaming loudly. The Vandal continues to scream loudly, causing Rudo to tense up. He suddenly starts moving towards the young man. Rudo doesn't even notice how the blades of Vandal's Jinky flash in front of his face. However, at the last moment, Rudo manages to dodge. He understands that the Vandal's forces have not gone away. And if they do not get away from here, Gris and the others may come under attack. However, Jabber doesn't let him get away, immediately blocking. He screams furiously, attacking. Rudo throws his hands forward. Looking at the Vandal flying towards him in fear, Rudo realizes that this won't work. He tries to grab his opponent by the wrist and manages to flip the Vandal over himself, sending him flying. Jabber rises up and begins to scream loudly, causing tears to appear in his eyes. Rudo realizes that the Vandal has indeed lost consciousness due to his poison. Gris's amulet can only react to hostility. He didn't expect Jabber to break through it so quickly. The Vandal clearly has more experience and is well prepared in every way. Rudo comes to the conclusion that Jabber is simply a masochist. The boy remembers the past, where some boy beat him up and asked why he didn't fight back, calling him a masochist. Then Rudo asks Legto what a masochist is. Jabber, his mouth open in rage, rushes forward again. How can Rudo defeat a masochist? Vandal cuts the wall into stone blocks. Pushing off from them, he quickly finds himself next to Rudo, immediately attacking. At the last moment, the boy manages to dodge. However, the Vandal does not stop, immediately attacking again. The enemy's Jinki almost catch up with Rudo, but a flying weapon appears from somewhere. It hits the Vandal, stopping the attack. Rudo shields his face from the dust that rises. Rudo opens his eyes to see a defeated Jabber lying before him. He recognizes the weapon. A voice is heard, noting that this Jinki gave him a truly lousy feeling. Rudo sees Zanka leaning against a pillar. Zanka addresses the dreadlocked Vandal. How dare he turn on this brat when he hasn't even defeated him yet? Looking up in anger, Zanka asks Rudo to back off. He needs to teach the Vandal a lesson. Rudo's eyes widen in surprise, but then he calmly approaches the pillar where Zanka is standing and leans against it like a wall. He turns to Zanka so he survived, but he doesn't look so good. Zanka is indignant, but everything is fine with him. Let the young man not dare to underestimate ordinary people. By the way, it looks like Rudo finally got to use his Jinki. That squid-like thing on his back looks pretty cool, but his ability doesn't work on Vandal, as he's completely insane. Rudo replies that he can only dodge him. Zanka clarifies that the squid-like thing can react to hostility. Rudo asks how he knows. Zanka admits that he analyzed his battle to learn how he fights. He is, after all, the one in charge of Rudo's training. Rudo can't attack with his weapon, and Zanka can't move properly because of that dreadlocked idiot. So he turns to Rudo. Zanka asks to be allowed to hit him. Rudo's eyes widen in shock. Zanka explains that he wants to test something. Basically, he'll hit her once, and that's it. The boy tensely pulls away. What the hell is he talking about? Zanka has difficulty moving, but if he attacks him, there is a chance that Rudo's weapon will react and move him. His love rod reaches further than the boy's fists, so Zanka will be able to reach it before Jabber's claws. Rudo clarifies that if nothing works out, everything will fly at him. Zanka asks him not to worry about it. During their conversation, the dreadlocked Vandal finally tries to get up. Zanka sums up that he is already up. Zanka resolutely retreats from the pillar towards the enemy, and the next moment, the pillar near which they were standing is cut by the Vandal's Jinki. They retreat. Zanka takes out her staff and reminds Rudo not to let those claws touch him. Even a small scratch is enough to immobilize the Virich. Zanka grits his teeth. Those claws are really annoying. Rudo remembers his words about not worrying. Zanka just turns away and asks to hit again. Zanka swings his staff, wanting to hit him hard. The young man's eyes widen in fear, and the amulet immediately notices the attack. I throw Zanku aside, and he immediately takes out his staff to strike the Vandal in the stomach. Jabber falls to the ground from the impact, causing everyone to freeze in confusion. Rudo's eyes widen in fear, tensely asking, did Zanka just hit him with real hostility? Zanka awkwardly waves it off and denies it. He never thought that this thing would actually work. Anyway, it was a test, he was just testing it. At least Zanka found a way to deal with the Vandal. The janitor stands behind the boy and suggests hitting him harder. He swings his staff, at which time Jabber comes to his senses. Rudo stands between the swinging Zanka and Jabber, waiting indifferently for the blow. The young man waves his arms in irritation, and Zanka is thrown forward. The janitor swings his staff mid-flight, bringing it down on the Vandal again. He stands next to the damaged Vandal. He notes that, it's interesting, Rudo can even increase the distance he flies. Zanka asks irritably if Rudo is too tough. The young man frowns, promising to show him real toughness. Zanka swings again, responding that Rudo should be more gentle. Vandal regains consciousness. The boy throws Zanku towards Jabber again. At this moment, the Vandal regains consciousness and notices Zanku, whom he had put to sleep some time ago. And Jabber gets hit on the head with Zanki's staff again. Vandal ends up on the ground, unconscious again. Zanka falls with a sigh. It's finally over. He can't move anymore. It was really rough. The boy watches for a moment, confused, and then relaxes. The eye behind him begins to disintegrate. Rudo turns around and screams in confusion, trying to catch or restore it. but the remains of the amulet slip through his fingers like dust. Zanka turns around and notices that the amulet is falling apart. Rudo can't believe it. He looks at the dust residue on his fingers. Why didn't he do anything? What should he do? Zanka wonders if the objects Rudo applies his influence to have a limit, or if there is another reason. Trembling with disappointment, the boy whispers that it is his fault, that he is responsible for the destruction of Gris's precious amulet. Zanka rolls over onto her stomach and notes that Rudo is acting strangely. The young man coughs and gradually loses consciousness. Zanka looks at the motionless young man in confusion. It can't be. When did Rudo manage to touch him with his claw? At this time, Jabber regains consciousness. Zanka notices this. Vandal stabs himself with his claws and jumps up. They had been playing for a long time. Jabber isn't quite sure what happened, but he seems to have done well while he was unconscious. Zanka, dumbfounded, asks how he can still stand. They hit him so many times. Jabber sits down next to the prone Zanka and explains that it's his left claws. Zanka asks incredulously, do they really have the ability to heal? Vandal laughs. Of course not, he's wrong. Jabber's left claws don't heal anything. He'll tell Zanka straight up, if you calculate the right amount of poison in them, they make all his pain go away. However, if you overdo it, it can become a serious problem. So usually the Vandal uses it on people he wants to really kill. He didn't think he'd screw up that badly, though. It was all thanks to Zanka and Rudo. Jabber was so used to the poison he gave Zanka that it only knocked him out for 10 minutes. But in Zanka's case, the poison lasted for about half an hour. So he'd give Zanka another shot. Zanka freezes from the poison. Jabber explains that if he does not achieve his original goal, he will be scolded again. Vandal approaches Rudo. Sitting down next to him, he thanks him for waiting and asks him to come with him. Jabber picks up the boy and places him on his shoulder. He waves to Zanka, indicating that they will see each other again, and disappears into the darkness. Zanka tries to get up despite the poison. Jabber remembers he forgot about the other two, but then waves it off. Someone will pick them up anyway. Vandal reaches the hole in the ceiling and heads outside. Rudo, hanging on his shoulder, can't move. He remembers Gris and again begins to blame himself for what happened. A happy Jabber jumps out of a hole in the ceiling. He lands and doesn't understand how he ended up outside. The Vandal should have been inside the building. Jabber runs forward, but Rui notices him. She has finally found him. An umbrella flies into the Vandal's stomach, and the force of the impact causes him to fly back. Injin notes, wow, they've got a cheeky, pathetic Vandal in here. Looks like this place needs some serious cleaning. Behind Injin stands a crowd of other cleaners. Injin and his team stand in front of the dreadlocked Vandal. His gaze casts downwards thoughtfully. He looks at the hole Jabber came out of. It goes pretty deep under this building. And because it's that deep, their communication chokers don't work. Setting a trap in a place where they can't call for help is pretty typical of villains. If these guys hadn't found a phone near the city and asked for help, the other cleaners wouldn't have known. The girl turns to Injin that Gris and the others must still be down there. Injin asks her not to worry, they are not weaklings. He asks her to take the boys and go help. Jabber smiles madly at the sight of so many strong people. He is so beaten and they look at him like trash. This excites the Vandal. The cleaners look at him skeptically. Injin asks Rudo if this is the guy they've been fighting all this time. He looks crazy. Ryu notes that Rudo looks better than she thought. The boy with the scar is skeptical that he can barely breathe. The man is filled with rage at how the Vandal dared to do this to his comrades. Injin tells the man to shut up. Well, he has a lot of questions for the Vandal, but the Vandal shouldn't think he can easily go back to his hole after messing with the cleaners. Jabber starts to whine that everything is bad. He needs to escape or he will lose his freedom. He needs an escape plan. But then he reminds the cleaners that he has orders too. He has a mission to capture this celestial. Jabber wants to escape so badly, but he doesn't care if he can't win and ends up dead. He can't go back without completing the mission. Suddenly, someone shouts, "No way." Someone hugs Jabber from behind around the waist, causing everyone to freeze in surprise. And she whispers that it's time for her and Jabber to go. Kuthoni, the girl hugging Jabber, repeats that they are leaving. However, the Vandal asks her to leave him, he cannot return yet. Shouldn't he capture the Celestial? Kuthoni replies that his time is up, and those guys are on the way. So they go back. Injin doesn't understand where this girl came from. Jabber is indignant. The girl suggests that he leave everything as it is. He shouts at her not to make him laugh. He is not finished playing yet. Kuthoni mutters quietly that the boss was grinning from ear to ear. Jabber turns to her cautiously. A wide smile appears on the vandal's face. Oops, oh no, it's that time already. He apologizes, but they have to go now. Too bad. They approach a hatch in the wall. Ryu freezes in surprise. Jabber turns to Rudo. He never thought he would be so much fun to play with, even though he is a celestial. Rudo must be unconscious from the poison. With a smile, the vandal waves his hand and asks to convey his best wishes to Rudo. Rudo tries to stand up. He screams for the fucking bastard to stop. Jabber turns to the young man, who is struggling to stand up. Rudo, placing his hand on the ground, declares that they are not finished yet. The vandal is surprised to find that he is still conscious even after the poison. Sputtering, the youth hisses that until the vandal pays in full for what he did to Grissom, they will not be finished. Jabber laughs, liking his fighting spirit, the next time they meet. But he suddenly goes silent. Vandal looks at Rudo's gloves. He notices the design. The young man also has this series. No one understands what he means. Jabber continues that the boss will be delighted when he tells about it. Kuthoni has already climbed into the hatch. Vandal notes that it looks like he has no choice this time, but he will be back for Rudo, so he should be ready for next time. Jabber tells him to treasure the gloves. They will play again one day. The hatch closes behind them and gradually disappears. Rudo reaches for it, then turns his attention to his gloves. What episode is this? The cleaners are getting all the victims out. There are cars parked outside the building. Ryu is chatting with Zenka, who is sitting by the wall. The guys are loading Gris. Rudo is rushing towards them. Gris lies unconscious on a stretcher. The young man closes his eyes. He apologizes for breaking his amulet. Suddenly, Gris quietly replies that it was very important to him, and he is very glad that Rudo's amulet was useful. The young man opens his eyes in despair. Gris praises him, calling him a fine fellow. Rudo is sitting on a bench with his face down. Engine sits down next to him and asks why he has such a sad face. By the way, he heard that Rudo was able to use Jinky normally. That's not bad. The young man is indignant, remembering that the vandal wounded Gris. What kind of face does Engine expect from him? Up there, he couldn't help the man who helped him here too. Gritting his teeth in despair, Rudo asks why. Even when he changed or achieved some success, the same thing still happened to him. He can never change. Rudo curses quietly. Engine is silent for a moment, not taking his eyes off the boy, and then explains that Gris was ready for this. He was ready to put his life on the line for his comrades. Gris protected the boy, not because he was a Skyman, but because he recognized Rudo as a comrade who could value both things and people. Engine stands up and calls the young man to come with him to see Gris. The young man quietly exhales. He and Engine walk in, and Rudo's eyes widen in shock. Gris sits on the bed with a smile and congratulates the young man on awakening his powers. The man is glad to see that Rudo is okay. The young man continues to stand there dumbfounded, rubbing his eyes several times, still not believing what he saw. He hesitantly approaches Gris's bed and asks in surprise, "Is he alive?" Everyone is stunned into silence. The dark-haired girl and Engine ruffle Rudo's hair, quietly teasing him. He thought Gris was dead, and they wondered why he was so depressed. Now everything is clear. Gris gently asks Rudo not to bury him too early. He is still alive. Rudo grits his teeth in resentment. He was confused. They told him that Gris was badly injured, so he thought he was dead. Gris smiles and notes that this is all thanks to the medical team of the cleaners, among whom this girl with blonde hair and a hat stands out. This girl is called Aisha Stilza. She is the only giver medic among the cleaners. Aisha lowers her head and quietly explains that she just wanted to help. Engine explains to Rudo that she is very shy. Gris thanks the girl because she saved his life, and then he notices Follow. Gris asks him not to be so depressed. He was there for him too, and thanks to that, Gris didn't get attacked by these vandals. Follow won't become a giver if you're impatient. He asks him to become one at his own pace. Tears appear in Follow's eyes. Follow leans his head and hands on Gris's bed, whining softly. Gris turns to Rudo. He notes that Rudo did a great job. Together with Zenka, the young man was able to corner a very strong opponent. It was amazing. And Rudo doesn't have to worry about the amulet. Gris is glad it was useful to someone. That's how he values things. Rudo is silent, head down, and then nods. He understood and is now truly glad that the man is alive. Engine also wants to add something of his own. The Vandals have begun a full-scale confrontation with the Cleaners, and this means that, in addition to the anomalous beasts, they will now have to deal with them as well. And new information has also emerged. A black man says that the Vandals' mention of the border indicates that they are collecting information about the heavens. Engine and Rudo turn around in surprise. The young man asks again who it is, and Engine nods understandingly. Engine calls this dark-skinned man with disheveled hair boss. Rudo is silent for a while, and then thinks hard about what he heard. Engine called this man boss. Is it really him? Is this really the boss of the Cleaners? The man approaches Rudo, pleased to meet him. He apologizes for not being here on the boys' first day. The boss introduces himself. His name is Corvus, Alha Corvus. In case Rudo hasn't figured it out yet, he is the boss of the Cleaners. If Corvus is not mistaken, Rudo wants to know how to get back up. That's why he's here, the young man awkwardly confirms. The boss honestly admits that he was surprised that Rudo came here just for information. They don't like people like that here. However, Rudo quickly earned the trust of his comrades. He protected them, risking his life. And the young man has a power that can be very useful to the Cleaners. Corvus has no objections. He asks to be allowed to formally greet Rudo as a janitor. The young man's eyes widen in surprise. The boss asks to come into his office. He has prepared a uniform and information for Rudo. In the office, Corvus explains that the border is what lies between heaven and the underworld. Those who tried to get to heaven died trying to cross this border. At least, that's what they say. The boss remembers that there is one very interesting story. In the Forbidden Zone, which was rumored to be very close to the border, there was a certain woman. It seems that this woman helped travelers who wandered into the Forbidden Zone. One day, a traveler asked her why she lived in such a place, and the woman gave an answer. She admits that she watches people coming down from above. This woman lived there for many years. Then she said that there is someone who can go up and down and not die. Corvus explains that perhaps this woman knows someone who can cross the border. That is, if they find the person she saw through this woman, they will be able to understand how to get up. And they will also be able to find out why Rudo did not die in the fall. Of course, the boss warns that it is very dangerous to go there, so it is up to Rudo to decide whether to visit this place or not. The young man grits his teeth and resolutely replies that of course he is going there. Corvus smiles. An Engine enters the office. He notes with a smile that Rudo is wearing a cleaner's uniform, and adds that Rudo looks very good. There is darkness all around. A drop of sweat falls from Zanka's face. He stares tensely at something dark coming out of the door. 6 hours ago. Follow squeezes Rudo in his arms, who is trying to break away. Follow reminds him that they are not going to meet the woman from the Forbidden Zone today. The dark-haired man is shaking slightly from the tension. Rudo turned out to be quite strong. Rudo furiously shouts that she can give a clue how to return to heaven. He will not stop. Follow tries to calm him down. He knows everything, but it is still her time. Engine appears nearby, who sternly asks Rudo to stop this already. He reminds the young man that he needs to prepare before going to such a dangerous place. This woman lives in the center of the Forbidden Zone. Rudo is going to go there even after gathering her information and learning his power? He wants to die? Rudo asks cautiously without having studied his power. Engine explains that it's great that he was able to learn how to use his power, but he doesn't even know its limits or its weaknesses. Both Rudo and Engine need to know this. Rudo asks if Engine is going to come with him. The man immediately replies that, of course, going into the forbidden area alone is pure suicide. Rudo mentally notes that Engine hasn't already gone there alone. Besides, the cleaners destroy the abnormal beast while gathering information about them, so going into the forbidden area would be useful to them. Engine reminds them that they should beware of vandals. Rudo thinks about it and asks how people like vandals can be givers. Engine turns to him and replies that not all people are good and not all people care about things. Even those who seem kind can be mean to things, and those who seem evil can have things that are important to them. No matter if you are good or bad, anyone can become a giver. However, there are people who look down on givers, calling them dependents. Engine thinks it is strange for them to have someone so obsessed with a thing. Rudo thinks, for some reason he decided that bad people can't take care of their things. It's a shame for such thoughts. But then he mentally adds that he will not allow vandals to do whatever they want. Engine goes ahead, one way or another. Today he asks the young man to rest. He is sure that Rudo has run enough for today. A dark corridor. The walls are covered in various graffiti. There are some symbols painted on the dark door, and Rudo is lying on a simple bed inside. He lies in his uniform, staring at the ceiling without sleep. Engine told him to rest, but how can he do that? Rudo can't sleep properly. He wants to go to the dump. Suddenly, the door to his room swings open, and Ryu stands in the doorway in a pompous pose. She addresses the young man, who quickly sits up on the bed. With a smile, Ryu offers to show the entire Rudo headquarters. The young man trembles slightly, frightened. They go out into the corridor. Ryu shows the rooms in order. First, the gym with various sports equipment. Then, the dining room. And the bathroom. Ryu explains that it's a bit run down, but it's spacious. Rudo turns his head cautiously. There's so much here compared to what he had upstairs. The girl asks what his life was like up there. Rudo remembers looking at the scenery with leg toe, looking for trash, being bullied. Ryu smiles and remarks, "So there are bullies up there too." She asks him not to worry, there are bullies up here too. The boy is silent for a while after her words. She asks what food he usually eats. Rudo lists that it's usually bread or soup. Ryu asks about sweets. The young man asks again in surprise, and answers that only rich people could eat sweets. Ryu smiles slyly and declares that they have sweets. They approach a tall door. Rudo looks at the assortment with admiration. There are people here who are called food sellers. Even the cleaners constantly buy from them. They notice Engine, he asks, "Did they come here to eat sweets?" Ryu nods. Rudo has never eaten them. Engine turns to the boy, who continues to stare at the plate of sweets with delight. He doesn't know what it's like up there, but sweets are much more popular here than drugs. It would be scary if he got hooked on them. Rudo continues to stare at the sweets in disbelief. So much food for the rich. Engine explains that the pollution makes it hard to grow plants here, but there are some givers among the food vendors who specialize in cooking. Perhaps that is the reason why they have so many more sweets than up there. Ryu watches Rudo with a smile and asks him to try it. The boy takes one of the sweets and puts it in his mouth. He is silent for a while, and then stars seem to light up around him. The young man screams loudly, "What is this? It's so delicious!" Rudo starts eating what's on the plate faster, unable to stop. Ryu smiles awkwardly. He pounced on them faster than she expected. Engine is worried that Rudo is hooked. As he continues to eat the sweets, Rudo thinks that he has never eaten anything so delicious. He can't stop. Suddenly, a voice is heard, noting that if Rudo eats too much, he will get fat. Engine is surprised to see the owner of the voice, and Rudo looks up, his mouth full of sweets. It's the janitor with a pacifier in his mouth. He and Rudo look at each other for a moment. Speechless, Rudo continues to chew, wondering what's wrong with this cleaner. Has he come for sweets? But Rudo wants more. He picks up the lollipop and closes his eyes. Rudo, shaking slightly with reluctance, hands the janitor a lollipop. The janitor abruptly takes the candy from Rudo's hands and, replacing the pacifier with the candy, says something to Ryu. Rudo, with huge eyes, points to the janitor with the candy and asks Engine, "What's wrong with this snot?" Engine calmly notes, "Look who's talking." The man in the bandana approaches the janitor and apologizes. Present time. Engine and Ryu are walking down the hallway. Engine asks Ryu what he's going to do with Rudo. The girl never thought he'd become like this, but she's glad Rudo found something he likes. Zanka notices them, looking at their backs questioningly. Ryu laughs, and yet, in one sitting, he empties all the sweets. Zanka wonders if Rudo has done something again. The boy walks down the dark corridor, turns the corner and freezes when he sees something dark appear from the door. It turned out to be Rudo's belly. A bloated youth floats out of the door. Zanka screams in shock that some strange stranger is here. Rudo frowns and tells him to go to hell. Engin looks into the distance. Zanka's gaze is directed downwards. Ryu looks away in shock, and Rudo sits with his lips pursed and his eyes closed. Rudo holds a small knife in his hand. He stands in front of Zanka with a staff, while Engin and Ryu sit on a bench. Zanka exhales. He turns to Rudo and asks if he can't use his jinky again. Engin, trying to hold back his laughter, also asks if he's become so obsessed with sweets that he's forgotten how to use his weapon. Rudo looks at his hands, eyes wide. No, that can't be it. With a sweet smile, Ryu adds that what was supposed to be a test of his abilities turned out to be a test of the success of his diet. It's good that Rudo can at least move normally. Her words make Engine laugh out loud. Rudo is confused and silent. He looks down at the knife in his hand. He remembers how to use his powers. Zanka thoughtfully puts his hand to his chin and clarifies. Rudo liked to fix discarded things. If this is the basis of his power, perhaps his power responds to broken things or trash. The young man tries to comprehend his words. At this time, Engine gets up from the bench. Rudo finds himself in front of a huge pile of trash. There is everything there. A fan, backpacks, a ruler, and much more. Zanka asks him to pick out something he likes. Rudo looks at the pile in surprise for a while, and then begins to examine everything with concentration. He touches each thing, examining it carefully. Rudo finds something interesting in the trash heap. He pulls it out. It turns out to be a triangular ruler. He lifts it up. Ryu and Engine come up with interest to take a look. It's quite a sharp object, Rudo whispers in disbelief that he succeeded. Engine notes with a smile that Zanka's interpretation hit the bullseye. It's not bad, as expected from a coach. Zanka smiles contentedly, but then his serious face returns. He declares that geniuses cannot look at themselves more objectively than they, ordinary people. And he adds, turning to Rudo, that he should not dare to look down on the mind of an ordinary person. Looking at his jinky with admiration, Rudo replies that he is now indebted to Zanka, to which the janitor simply rolls his eyes. Zanka folds his arms and declares that Rudo is annoying him. Let him try to transform several objects into a weapon in a row. They will see how many times he can do it. Ryu and Engine exchange glances and laugh quietly. Rudo gets to work. He takes a teapot from a pile of garbage and tries to transform it. In his hands, the teapot becomes a super teapot. Zanka asks if he can transform something else. Rudo again transforms another object. Watching the boy work, Engine is more and more surprised. His mentor asks if he can still do it. How much power is in the boy? Suddenly, Rudo's nose starts bleeding and he falls to his knees in exhaustion, causing Zanku to cry out in fear. Engine comments that he used Jinky several times in a row and his nose started bleeding. The quality of his Jinky gloves is excellent, but the same cannot be said about his body, apparently. The young man carefully turns his head towards the speaking engine and asks about the quality. Engine explains that the more time he spends taking care of an object, the better it will be as a Jinky. They call this quality improvement. The better the quality, the greater the power. But quality is not the only factor that affects its strength in battle. It is also affected by the user's experience and mindset. In short, Engine concludes, both are important. Zanka is silent, thinking, having a dialogue with himself. If Rudo has been taking care of them since he was a child, then the quality of his gloves is probably good, but should it really affect the body so much? Is it somehow related to his series? Rudo thinks about Engine's words, and then, remembering Griss's amulet and other things, asks, then why do the things he turns into weapons eventually fall apart? The things he transformed just now didn't break. Even if Rudo changed their shape, it seemed like they had a limit. Ryu suggests that maybe they just don't have any regrets anymore, since Rudo has the ability to release the value of things that people break and throw away. Thus, Ryu explains, when Rudo uses them again, these things eventually fulfill their function completely. This is quite unusual, Zanka comments thoughtfully, and indeed, when the battle came to an end and Rudo relaxed, his weapon was destroyed. Engine also thinks about it. He suggests that this is also part of Rudo's ability. The boy releases the value of trash and broken things, absorbing them so that they can fully fulfill their function. Engine thinks that Ryu is right. Rudo did not destroy Griss's amulet, or any of the items he turned into weapons. He simply exhausted the value of the things that was still left in them to the very end. Rudo looks down at his gloves thoughtfully. I see. So this ability doesn't destroy things. Ryu asks the question. What does it mean that these gloves of his are from a series? Rudo himself does not know, so he wonders if this means that there are others like them. Why did Legto have them? Ryu explains that perhaps these gloves have a name. Rudo asks in surprise, what is the name of the gloves? Ryu nods. Usually he gives names to things that are important to him. For example, the Jinki of the cleaners also have names. The name of Ryu's scissors is Reaper. Enjin's umbrella is called Destroyer. And Zanka's stick is called Love Rod. Rudo is confused and says he never even thought about it. Ryu points out that he should give them a proper name. Another location, a dilapidated building. Jabber and Kubani approach a door lit only by a lamp above. It turns out to be the boss's room. They report that they are back, cautiously approaching. Jabber and Kubani look at their boss, who mumbles something. Cleaners, City of Arts, Deserted Altar, Jinki, Series Keeper, and finally he says the name Rudo. In the bathroom, the young man decides to wash his gloves. Frowning in pain, Rudo dips his injured hands into the water to rinse them, then exhales. He wipes his gloves with a towel as he enters the room. His eyes widen in surprise when he spots Ria on his bed. She comments that he woke up too early. The girl yawns. It's only 4 a.m. and they're not leaving until tomorrow. Rudo's face contorts with a large number of emotions. He asks hesitantly why Ryu is in his room now, how long has she been lying here, and how did she even get in here? Ryu explains that her room is right above his room. She heard some moans and got worried, so she just climbed in through the window. The boy nods awkwardly. But why is she on his bed? She turns to him and asks, "Is it his hands?" Rudo looks down at his cut hands and answers, "Honestly, they don't hurt much if he wears gloves, but he has to wash them every now and then." Ryu notes that his hands look really bad. What's wrong with them? Burns? That doesn't look like them, though. Rudo replies that if she wants to find out what it is, she'll have to ask his fucking parents. Ryu sits up on the bed. The parents give them everything, both good and bad. The girl gets up and leaves the room, leaving Rudo alone in the deserted room. There is a noise. Hearing a cacophony of different sounds, Gris and Injin cautiously peer through the half-open door. A young man is sitting at the table, writing something and shouting loudly. The men understand that this will take a long time. They go to the secretary. The boss says that while Rudo's full defense is being prepared, he will begin making final preparations. Rudo turns to Injin suspiciously. The man explains that full protection is what they, the cleaners, wear when they go into restricted areas. Like this helmet he was wearing when they first met in the restricted area. Rudo remembers it. They have their own craftsmen for that. They even make clothes for them. But if Injin puts a deadline on them, they start putting everything off until the last minute and do nothing, so he lets them work at their own pace. Zanka frowns. He always rushed them, so he was scolded. The boss explains that until they finish, Rudo, in simple terms, will go get a good luck charm. The secretary notes that you never know what might happen in the restricted area. Sometimes you might step on trash, and then suddenly, boom, people dying from anomalous beasts is quite common. In order to minimize the possibility of this happening, she uses the ability of certain Giverums. More specifically, she wants them to draw something for her. Rudo clarifies in surprise. Boss said that they can do whatever they want, so they come to the cleaners every now and then to draw, but she hasn't seen them in a long time. They must be too busy. Injin notes with displeasure that, if they were here, he wouldn't have to go there every time. Rudo turns his head towards Enjin and asks, "So where are they heading now?" Enjin grins. They're heading to Graffiti Canvas Town. Rudo will also be accompanied by several cleaners in his search for the woman from the restricted area. There are 7 of these cleaners, including Ryu, Folo, Zanka, and Gris. Of the fighters with him will be Zanka, Ryu, and Enjin. Of the guards, Delmon and Tamzi. And their support, Gris, Folo, and Tametum. They usually bring a group of 5 support members with them, but since they are going into a restricted area, they should bring more givers than support members without abilities. Suddenly, one of the cleaners, the biggest man, Delmon, speaks loudly to Rudo. He heard his life story. What horrors the boy went through. Delmon will never forgive those who do such terrible things to his comrades. He likes people who have passion. Therefore, in Delmon's opinion, Rudo should also be a guard. Suddenly, this cleaner is asked to stop. It's Tamzi. He hugs Rudo and explains to Delmon that he was brought here by Injin, so now he is among the fighters. Tamzi turns to the young man and asks for forgiveness. Despite his appearance, Delmon is a good person. Tamzi smiles and adds that he, too, loves passionate people. Engine chimes in, well, since he's here, why shouldn't everyone hear how passionate Delmon is? As Delmon clears his throat, Zanka quickly covers her ears with her hands, and Rudo freezes in confusion. Delmon clears his throat again and screams loudly. They are heading to Canvas Town. He continues to shout. They have a difficult road ahead. However, they must not give up. Why? Because they are cleaners. The cleaners exclaim in support after his words. Rudo looks at Delmon dumbfounded, clearly shocked by this passion. The cleaners also shout back, supporting Delmon. All together they ride in an SUV. In front of the city there is graffiti. A young man shakes a can of paint and continues to draw patterns on the wall together with his partner. An SUV flies past a guy standing on a stepladder and drawing something on the wall. The young man almost falls from the height. He looks indignantly towards the car. Another young man shouts after him that the driver should watch where he is going. He almost hit him, and then he curses in response to the apologies coming from the car. The SUV races through the deserted area. Rudo looks at what lies ahead in surprise. They drive up to the city and get out of the car. Rudo continues to look around, confused. He carefully asks, are all the cities here shaped like this? Tamsi explains that most large cities are domed. This protects them from whatever is thrown from the sky. What was thrown? Rudo's eyes widened in understanding. Tamsi confirmed his guess. Yes, it was the garbage thrown from the sky. Many people, unable to live in cities and forced to live in the open, were killed by the garbage rain. The cleaner tells Rudo not to worry. It is the fault of those who allowed this to happen. In the distance, near the gate, a man is quietly cursing. The second man asks what he is doing. The bald man replies that there is something wrong with this city. The door is wide open, but he still can't get in. They both try to go through again, but are met by an invisible wall. What the hell is going on? However, the next moment they notice Engine and Delmon calmly walking inside. Rudo's eyes widen in surprise, and Engine turns around and addresses him. It's okay, he can come in too. Engine explains that the boy can enter the city without any problems, as long as he doesn't have any strange intentions. They enter a city full of various signs and graffiti. There are drawings everywhere. Ryu notes that this place never ceases to amaze her. Down here, there are many who like to draw here and there, but not everyone likes it. That's why Canvas Town was built, so that everyone could freely draw wherever they want. Zanka adds that there are more and more drawings here every time. Ryu smiles, reminding Corvus that this city is usually called the City of Art. Tamsi notices that Delmon has gotten some paint on him, to which the man immediately turns to him. Rudo silently follows ahead. He asks disappointedly, so they came here to look at the drawings? Engine explains that they came here to see a giver in this city, who had many artists in his family. Engine continues. His ability is to cast the power of a talisman on things he draws on. How can I explain it, for example? He can make it so that the first attack on this wall has no effect. It's like he puts his feelings, meaning, something like that into it. Basically, if he draws on this wall, it will have this property. Something like that. Engine asks to remember the moment when those two bastards couldn't get into the city. It's because of the ability of that giver, which affected the outer wall of this city with its power. It's a kind of enchantment that prevents people with bad intentions from getting into the city. Those guys were probably up to something. In general, Engine concludes, there are many ways to use this power. But such jinki are very rare. And it did not even belong to this giver initially. This jinki is passed down from generation to generation. Suddenly, someone hits Engine in the stomach and falls to the ground. He asks if the person is okay. It turns out to be a little crying girl with blonde pigtails. All the cleaners stare at her in shock. She sobs, wiping away tears, and runs past Engine. Everyone freezes in silence. Ryu accuses Engine of making the girl cry. The man turns around indignantly at her words. The girl repeats that he made her cry. Engine tries to justify himself again. He didn't do anything. Suddenly, a voice is heard from around the corner, saying that the cleaners arrived earlier than he expected. It's a man in a cap and coat. Engine greets him as the mayor. He thought that the artist was home as usual. They were going to ask him for a talisman again, so they were going to him. Engine asks where Gob is today. The mayor is silent for a moment, and then replies that he died that morning. They are brought to a body covered with a sheet. Engine can't believe it. The mayor explains that it was because of the pollution of the body. Gobu didn't like sitting in the safe zone, so he went to the polluted zones to draw there. He must have enjoyed drawing so much that he kept taking off his mask. The mayor closes his eyes and remembers how many times he warned him to wear the mask, and still, Engine continues to stand silently by the body, and then lowers himself to the floor next to the bed where the body lies. The mayor is sorry that it happened right before their arrival. Engine says that everything is fine. Tamsi turns her attention to Rudo and asks him not to let it affect him. After all, people often die from this here. Rudo is too tense and does not look up from the floor. The mayor asks them to wait for the talismans a little longer. Engine tries to calm him down, saying there is no need to rush. However, the mayor replies that they have already decided everything. They already know who got this jinky, passed down from generation to generation. There is an heir, but there is also one problem. Heirs are always appointed by their predecessors. The mayor does not know what criteria they use to make their choice. Perhaps it is a matter of drawing ability. Or perhaps it is something much deeper. But what he does know is that the heir awakens his giver abilities when he receives this jinky and begins to devote himself to the craft of an artist spellcaster. The girl crying next to the body is Remlin Tizark. She was the one who was appointed as the next spellcaster. She is the same girl who recently hit Engine. It is a great honor for artists to take on the burden of this pen. But she is still too young. For their city, graffiti is, so to speak, a calling card. And the mayor does not know if she will be able to bear the weight of responsibility that has fallen on her. Rudo does not take his eyes off the girl at this time. Remlin, with his head down, continues to cry all this time. Sympathy flashes in the young man's eyes. Follow sighs next to him. There are people who can just become givers like that. Follow continues to express his thoughts. If you don't take good care of your item, it won't become a jinky. However, those who have great potential to become givers can become one the moment they receive a jinky, even if they haven't owned one before. Although it still depends on the quality of the item. And as Zonka would say, talent wouldn't hurt either. Tamsi chimes in, before we talk about talent, it's important to remember that inheriting jinky is incredibly rare. Follow sighs and agrees. After the words about inheriting the jinky, Rudo couldn't help but look down at his gloves. The mayor was sorry to say this, but it seemed like the process of drawing the talismans would take some time this time. Remlin was very attached to Gob. He was like an older brother to her, and now this had happened. And so suddenly. Covering his face with his hand, the mayor adds that it seemed like Gobu really enjoyed creating his paintings. Whether it was at someone's request or not, when he drew, he showed with all his appearance how much he enjoyed what he was doing. Although the mayor could never draw, he had a desire to protect Gob's creations, and that's why he became the mayor of this city. Engine agrees Gob was a guy who came to the cleaners whenever he wanted, drew whatever he wanted, and fired them as easily as he came. And that playful smile of his, which he made every time he ran home. Engine regrets that he will never be able to see that smile again. Everyone falls silent, but after a while, Engine still gets up. Anyway, they have no choice but to go shopping in the city and then go home. Maru apologizes again. He is very sorry that this happened. Engine turns to the crying Remlin and says that they will come visit next time. Let the girl take care of herself. Suddenly, the girl screams very loudly. Enough! This action makes the mayor and Engine look at the girl in shock. Remlin sniffles. She repeats, enough, several times more. Remlin stands up and wipes her tears with her hand. She approaches the mayor and shouts that it's enough to be sad. With a smile, the girl declares that it is time to go to the festival. The mayor and Engine stare at her in shock. Grabbing a marker, the girl runs off, screaming about the festival. After she leaves, everything falls silent. Engine exchanges shocked glances with the mayor. They climb up to the roof. Remlin is jingling something, clutching a can of paint in his hand. The mayor calls out to her cautiously, but the girl interrupts him. She thought that the sadness of Gob's death would break her heart, but she is sure that if they only cry for him, he will not be able to enjoy life in the afterlife. She opens a black marker. With a big smile, Remlin starts writing something with a marker, then she lifts it up, filling it with power. This marker is now her jinky. An explosion is heard from the place where the girl was standing, causing everyone to watch everything in fascination. Remlin smiles, and a long, beautifully inlaid brush appears in her hands. She waves it, and she paints graffiti on the roof floor with the words "festival." Very quickly, she paints everything around. An explosion of fireworks is heard, which surprises all the inhabitants of the city. It's time for fun. The girl continues to draw. She wants everyone to have fun and draw, and to enjoy it to the fullest. Rudo does not take his eyes off her, remembering how Legto held his hand when they were at the festival. All the residents take paints in their hands and start painting. They rejoice at the sight of fireworks. The mayor apologizes again. It looks like the mascot will take some time to create. Engine smiles and says he understands. This is Canvas Town, the city of joy and freedom. Remlin smiles contentedly, looking at the young man she painted. "So, what does Rudo want her to draw?" he complains, indignantly. Meanwhile, the mayor and Engine are sitting quietly on the couch. Rudo can't hold back and gets louder. What did she do to his face? The girl starts laughing. He asks indignantly what she is laughing at. Engine closes his eyes and notes that he seems to be beginning to understand what type of person worthy of inheriting the ability of a spellcaster should be. Remlin is the same in spirit as her predecessor. The mayor quietly replies that no one will make her stop being naughty, just like the other artists. Sitting on the table with a smile, the girl introduces herself once again. She will have fun, that is, she will try her best as a spellcaster. Wiping his face with a towel, Rudo notes the word entertain. Engine asks how many generations of spellcasters have existed. The mayor replies that for these guys, their paintings are their records, so they didn't leave any other data about themselves. Engine nods understandingly. Remlin turns to Rudo. She has realized something. She has to ask people's permission before she can paint on their faces. Swinging her legs from side to side, the girl admits that she often asks permission before painting on walls outside the city, so maybe that's what's needed here too. She'll certainly be given permission to paint on walls and objects, but it's much more important to get the okay from people so that she can paint on them too. Engine turns to the mayor and quietly asks, "Let's say Gob's power is inherited. Will it be exactly the same?" The mayor explains that as far as he knows, the ability has remained the same for all generations, but it may differ in some details. Engine thoughtfully presses his palm to his chin. Each person decides for themselves how to use their things, experiences, and thoughts. The ability and form of the jinky varies depending on who uses it. But the fact that this jinky retains its properties for many generations suggests that it is very special in itself. However, the girl denies this. She explains that the jinky stays the same because the most important trait in all of them is playfulness. Engine and the mayor look up at her, slightly tense. Remlin explains that stress balls, a bouquet of flowers for arguments. They find all sorts of meanings for things when they draw and play with this jinky. Freedom and play. Gob and his predecessors were chosen because they valued those two things above all else. And someday, she will choose the same person. Engine and the mayor look at the girl without emotion. The mayor doesn't quite get what Remlin is talking about, and neither does Engine. Engine clarifies that it means she simply shares the same ideas, and therefore the ability is exactly the same. However, Remlin rejects this guess as well. It's not like that. They are free to draw whatever they want, so their ideas can't be the same. Engine opens his mouth in shock, unable to put words together. The mayor stops him. The more he tries to understand the artist, the more confused he will become. Rudo mentally notes that Engine is already going crazy. The boy takes off his jacket. He needs her to draw a talisman that says reduce heavy damage once. She has to draw it on his body. Remlin smiles broadly. Request received. She raises her hand with the marker. It transforms into a tattoo machine. Engine immediately stops her. Does she want to give him a tattoo? The mayor asks her to take it more seriously. He suddenly freezes. When she transformed the jinky, it looked like a brush. But what shape is it in now? Remlin explains that when she thought about giving Rudo a tattoo, the jinky transformed into this. She wants to use different tools. Engine exclaims in surprise, "Really?" In addition to casting spells, she also has the ability to materialize any drawing tool. How many surprises there are in the girl! Zanka, standing at the entrance, looks around warily, hearing loud voices. Remlin closes her eyes. Okay, she won't tattoo Rudo. It's time for her to get serious. She clears her throat and smiles at Rudo. Could she draw graffiti, a talisman, on his body? The mayor hangs his head in despair, while Engine states that at least he can't say he doesn't like the girl, and Rudo realizes that she's not learning anything. They leave the city. The young man has a talisman on his back, covered by a jacket. Engine thanks the mayor for the service he has rendered. He waves his hand, no thanks. He apologizes again for causing them so much trouble. Engine notes that Remlin clearly had a hard time drawing the talismans for the 9 of them. He looks at the tired girl and praises her. She really did a great job for her first time. They emerge from under the invisible dome, and Rudo sees again those boys who couldn't get in. He notices their gaze lingering on the girl and her marker. The man starts to get indignant as he approaches the mayor. What is this supposed to mean? He can't believe that some unknown girl inherited this jinky. Someone more suitable should be the heir. The man continues that he is the absolute champion in this world of art. Many people expected him to be the heir to the power of a magic caster. He came all the way here, but with such an heir, Canvas Town will turn into ruins. And if the man is honest, he thinks he is a much better artist. Suddenly, the mayor loudly shouts at him to shut his mouth. The mayor is seething with rage. That's why they couldn't even set foot in this town. They don't need guys like these who think they're artists and are blinded by fame. The mayor yells again that if they've figured it out, they should get out of here. They're just eyesores, bastards. The men back away tensely. Engine notes that the enraged mayor is more frightening than anyone else. They get into the car and say goodbye to the mayor and Remlin. Engine asks him not to get too worked up, or else his blood pressure will spike again. Rudo rolls down the window and thanks the girl. Thanks to her, he got to see something interesting. He will definitely come back. With a smile, Remlin promises that he will also drop by the cleaners sometime. The car sets off. They wave goodbye to each other. Rudo asks if they're going back to the cleaners. Engine says yes, they'll take his full coverage. But then he seems to remember something. Before they return, Engine suggests the young man go somewhere. He will definitely like it there, the young man asks cautiously. They pull up to a huge building. It's a garbage collection point. Rudo's mouth drops open in delight. He asks hesitantly if he's sure he can. Engine allows him to take a few things that might be useful in an emergency. They're outside the contaminated area, so there are no abnormal beasts. Engine gives him time to dig around. Rudo can do whatever he wants with the pile. The cleaner turns to Rudo, but the boy has already disappeared. With a loud scream, as if possessed, Rudo is already burying himself in this pile of garbage. Engine awkwardly notes, he must really like this. While the young man is rummaging through that pile of trash, suddenly the TV set there picks up interference and shows an image. In this image, a man's hand is in a glove. They return to the cleaners. The strange guy shouts loudly that it is finished, everything is ready, here it is, he did it. The cleaners watch silently until Rudo asks who this man is. Semu greets them. She recently received news from Canvas Town. It is very unfortunate. But then a long-haired man with glasses appears in front of the secretary. He shouts that Rudo's mask is ready. Engine and Rudo look at him for a while, and Engine nods. Cleaners. Explains that this guy makes gear for cleaners. His name is August. It looks like Rudo's full cover is ready. August agrees. He notes that it fits perfectly. Even though he hasn't met Rudo, he took his measurements while he was sleeping, and as a result, it fits him perfectly. Engine and Semu told him about his personality, so they decided to go along with the boss's choice and made her super cool. Rudo tensely asks, did August take the measurements while he was sleeping? To which August shamelessly replies that he was lucky that the boy left the door unlocked. Rudo scolds him. Engine, looking at the boy, asks, do the Celestials not lock the doors? Ryu explains that Rudo doesn't sleep well, so Augustus must have had to work hard to catch the right moment. The girl is immediately asked how she knows about this. A nurse girl hurries towards them, calling Augustus brother, which shocks Rudo even more. August greets his sister with a smile. Aisha squeezes her brother's hand and asks him not to cause trouble for the others. Besides, August is too noisy. Rudo asks, dumbfounded, are they related? Fully armed and carrying their suitcases, they head to the SUVs. Rudo mutters under his breath that there are too many noisy people down here. Zanka and Engine turn around at his words. Is there something he doesn't like? Engine asks Rudo to take off his choker for a moment. The others cut their thumbs to draw some blood, some with a knife, some with scissors. Rudo tenses up, dumbfounded. Engine asks him to calm down and give them the choker. Everyone touches Rudo's choker with their finger. Engine explains that the chokers are a kind of transmitter. No, more like a phone. He can use it to communicate with people he exchanged blood with. Rudo understands why everyone here wears collars. He mentally muses that it must be someone's jinky ability. Follow points out that there is something about this exchange of blood that makes people feel like closer friends, and Rudo can call it up at any time. The boy nods. And with a smile, Injin asks Rudo to give them his blood too. Everyone looks at the young man in anticipation, who tensely opens his eyes, and so they finally go to see this woman from the Forbidden Zone. Injin would like to say so, but isn't Rudo taking too much junk with him? The back seat is completely buried under junk. Injin points out that they'll be walking the entire way there, so Rudo should only take what he can take. Skyward sighs, he just grabbed it all, just in case. This is Rudo's second visit to the Forbidden Zone. Once they arrive, they will be faced with danger, so the young man must be prepared. Rudo is determined. They arrived in the restricted area. Each cleaner put on his own mask so he could breathe. This is the desert Forbidden Zone of Penta. It's very hot. The cleaner squats down, rolling sand in his fingers. No, it's waste that has turned to dust. Suddenly, in the distance, they notice a pillar of dust. It has begun. Rudo remembers August's words about the covering. First, he puts on his half mask. Then he hooks up his oxygen tank to it. Then he tops it all off with his mask. That will be his full covering. He follows the instructions that pop into his head. A huge anomalous beast appears before them. The cleaners note that Rudo still needs to get used to it. But it becomes fun. According to the witnesses, the woman is further ahead. Injin asks Rudo not to lag behind. The young man nods, well, of course. With these gloves, Rudo will turn the abnormal beasts into dust according to the 3R principle. And he will go looking for that woman. Let the major cleaning begin. One of the cleaners starts recording. The first abnormal beast they encountered in the Penta-restricted area has a shape reminiscent of a scorpion. Due to the thickness of its shell and the way it behaves, it should have a similar attack mechanism to a scorpion. So it's reasonable to assume that it would use its claws and tail to attack. Ryu dodges the abnormal beast's tail by jumping. She lowers herself down and kicks the beast's claw and immediately retreats. Ryu takes out her scissors and cuts the limb of the abnormal beast. The severed limb flies towards Zanka. The anomalous beast snaps its claws. To which Zanka honestly replies that it was not he who cut off his limb. However, the beast still swiftly attacks him. Zanka takes out her staff and asks the monster to be quiet. It is too noisy. He quickly attacks the beast and jumps to the side. Zanka delivers a few more swift blows, easily dodging the pincers. The anomalous beast attacks again, but Zanka pierces its limb with her staff. However, the beast manages to grab the janitor's staff. Zanka raises her staff along with the beast. The sounds bring other abnormal beasts running. They surround Zanku. The boy looks up and sees Injin flying out of the sky towards the monsters, clutching a spinning umbrella in front of him. He quickly uses the 8 slashes technique. The 3 of them fight the abnormal beasts. Injin looks up at the monster in front of him and states that he missed, so he leaves it to him. Another cleaner, Rudo, quickly moves into the attack. A black keyboard appears in front of him, on which he types something. There's a girl standing in the distance. Her hair is dark and reaches her waist. She sniffs. She smells the scent. Have they really come to see her? The young man types something on the keyboard, and keys burst out of it, which quickly attack the monster. Looking at the defeated monster, Rudo calls the beast a fucking bastard and gives it the middle finger. A whirlwind of dust rose up and obscured the view, and Rudo, trying to clear his throat of dust particles, coughed violently. With great effort, he forced his eyelids open, squeezing them tightly shut, and immediately began to rub his eyes, trying to improve his vision. While the young man was coming to his senses, Injin noticed a significant accumulation of scorpion abnormal animals. Smoothing the sand with his palms, the guy came to the conclusion that if those came from underground, then under the sand cover, probably. There was a lot of garbage hidden. A sudden noise distracted his attention, and he turned to Tum, reminding her of the importance of the recording, but stressed that it was unsafe during the battle. The girl agreed, but apparently forgot about it, and reminded that in the restricted area they had to protect her and trusted them. He still asked her to be more careful. Something caught Rudo's attention, and he turned around sharply, but saw only clouds of dust. He suspected that there was something hidden there, and, certain of this, he peered intently into the thick veil of dust for some time. Suddenly, Delman appeared from behind. The guy decided that he had caught something and jumped to the side, trying to grab it but to no avail. Turning around, he saw Delman and Tamsi, which surprised him greatly. The latter noticed that there was an especially large amount of sand today, and they almost lost Rudo. Anyway, the young man did a great job, and Tamsi expressed a desire to see his heroism with his own eyes. He replied that he should not worry and that he would have another chance to see more, and asked him to stay closer next time. Rudo was glad that at least this time he was a little useful. Suddenly, an unfamiliar girl appeared from the clouds into view, and everyone froze in silence, watching her. She slowly approached, giggling quietly. The girl said she knew that they went this way to meet Amo and asked if she was right. Jabber asked the boss if this something was really in the forbidden desert zone of Pinta and if they should start searching there. The girl looked at them silently with a strange look, and after some time of silence, Tamsi asked how long she had been standing there. Delman noted that visibility was poor, but he couldn't believe he hadn't noticed her before. Rudo began to have suspicions about the stranger. Engine suggested perhaps they were looking for her, but that would be too easy. In any case, she didn't look hostile, and they wondered if they could ask her directly. Ryu called out to the stranger and asked if she had seen anyone who could travel between heaven and this world. The girl stopped and said that asking so directly was not good. After some thought, the girl replied that she had seen such a person, and Ryu conveyed her words, confirming that's exactly what they were looking for. Engine suspected that they were lucky, and now they had to find out from her everything they needed to know and get out of there. Suddenly, the girl started coughing hard and said that it smelled bad in here, and it was bad for her lungs. She suggested that they talk inside if they were going to do that. The stranger said that they would not need masks in the house, and Tamsi asked why she did not wear a mask herself. She repeated that the house was nearby and asked to follow her. Ryu grabbing Engine by the hand, she explained that if everything "what does this girl say" turns out to be true, then he will be able to talk to her on his own. But he answered that they would all go to her, and no matter what she had in mind, they just needed to talk to her, and if they had to fight, he would deal with her himself, since he was the best at adapting to any situation. Seized with a chilling horror, Rudd looked around in confusion. Engine was clearly ill, he showed no signs of consciousness, and threw up. Stomach contents. The guy continued to pull out, and the unfamiliar girl watched what was happening with a frightening look. The young man could not believe what had happened. In front of him lay the engine lies motionless on the floor. Just an hour ago, they were following this girl through the desert, and she was walking ahead, showing them the way, asking them to follow her. Stopping, she pointed to an unusual place, a staircase between the rocks, where there was only one entrance, and reported that they had already arrived at the place. The boys looked at the huge building with curiosity. Tom had never thought that such a structure could exist in the depths of the Forbidden Zone, and decided that it needed to be recorded immediately. Zanka saw this building on the way, but could not even imagine that it was someone's home. Red was amazed, and suddenly felt that, looking at this structure, one could even reach the heavens if they could climb up there. Suddenly the hostess interrupted them, and hurriedly invited them to enter the house. Opening the doors, she let in a gust of wind and invited the guests to come in. The boys hesitated, looking at all this with suspicion. Gris, looking at the interior decoration, thought that the house looked too strange. The girl pointed to the living room behind the chain doors, explaining that she was not quite cleaned up and suggested going into Amo's room. She also reminded guests as she climbed the stairs that they could take off their masks there, as the stench had not penetrated there. She was confused that the guys did not show their faces and considered it an impolite and rude gesture. They silently looked at her, and it seemed to them that the stranger was a little strange. As soon as everyone took off their masks, she enthusiastically began to praise their appearance, saying how cool, cute, and sophisticated they were. The girl sat down in front of them and happily said that she was happy to see their faces. Tum continued to take notes and noted that the room on the top floor was exquisitely decorated, only to be interrupted by Gris, who said that she did not need to write everything down. Rudo looked around and saw many things. He was amazed at the abundance of objects in the house that was in the middle of the desert. The young woman knocking her knees nervously, she started a conversation and asked what they wanted to know. The young man waited for Engine's reaction and glanced at him. They told her that they were looking for a person who could move between worlds, and that she saw him and therefore came to her. Hearing this, the girl suggested talking about those they like. She seemed very happy at that moment. The stranger ominously said that she likes people with a strong smell. For her, the smell was more important than the face. She sniffed and said that the big guy among them she liked the most. It was Damon. What they heard shocked the guys, and Rudo wanted to clarify what kind of nonsense she was talking about. But he was interrupted by Engine, who asked the lady if her conversation about people they liked was a kind of payment for information from her. She didn't quite understand what he meant. The guy explained that they wanted to get information about the path to heaven, and talking about who they liked would be a waste of time. But he would do her a favor and keep her on the topic. This news upset the girl, and she fell silent. Then, exploding with anger, she asked what the hell they were doing. The girl I realized that her guests didn't want to talk to her, and even if they did, it sounded insincere, like they were trying to take advantage of her. In a rage, she repeated her question about what the hell they were doing, emphasizing that she was happy to receive guests from outside, but realized that they wanted to use her. She asked them if they wanted to see her just like that and realized that the guys came to take from her what they needed. She felt like they were making fun of her. The stranger wouldn't even care if they lied and said that they came to see her, it would make her quite happy. Injin realized his mistake and that he shouldn't have told her that. He tried to smile and said that he was very interested in her. These words caused a new wave of anger, and the lady screamed at him not to lie to her. She jumped up to him from her place and replied that he wasn't her type anyway. Injin, confused, asked if she wanted to hear what he thought and admitted that he didn't know where to look. The guy asked her to put something on. The girl answered, "What? A man which points to the woman how to dress her is the worst of all," and declared that it's all over. The lady was beside herself with anger and emphasized that there could not even be friendship between them. Engine realized that she's still a giver, and Rudo noticed an interesting detail. The stranger caught his eye with her shoes, or rather, symbol on his boots, identical to the sign on his own gloves. The girl announced the end and handed the rest over to the strong man. A moment later, Delman acknowledged the order and aimed his weapon at Engine. With a deafening sound, the boy fell to the floor, plunging everyone into a stupor. Unable to comprehend what had happened, they stared at the culprit of what had happened. Silence gripped the space. Rudo approached Delman, asking him about his actions regarding the boy, but Delman himself looked extremely unusual and did not answer. The young man's gaze was lifeless. He looked into nowhere and remained silent. Instantly realizing that something was wrong, Rudo, raising his voice, turned to the girl, demanding an explanation about what she did to him. He made it clear that he realized that she was a giver and noticed that she was wearing shoes with a mark on them, on her boots, identical to the one on his gloves, CR. The young man persistently sought an answer, "Who is she?" But in response, "I only saw how sinister I am." The grin was replaced by a fake smile, ignoring all his questions. The stranger, as if she had not heard anything, suggested returning to the discussion of personal preferences and likes. Those present froze in complete stupor, looking at her with horror and bewilderment. Noticing their reaction, the girl was embarrassed, not understanding the reason for the silence that had reigned and their depression. She noted that communication is important for a productive conversation and asked, "Do those present know about this?" The lady also emphasized that if we speak only of amo, this does not contribute to rapprochement. Knowing people's tendency to talk about themselves, the stranger suggested that everyone talk about themselves to have fun. She emphasized that everyone present her long-awaited guests, with the exception of the boar she called Engine, who was lying on the floor, still showing no signs of consciousness. Watching all the horror happening around Rudo, he was overcome with despair, and he realized that a normal conversation with her would not work. Zenka intervened in the conversation and stated that he understood everything. He was well aware that only those who indulged her whims and those who intentionally irritated her would get her attention. Ria tried to stop him. The young man was determined to get his voice across to this arrogant woman. The young man declared the conversation over. Not understanding what kind of technique she had used, he asked how she dared to use it on Engine. The whole situation disgusted him. He didn't care whether he needed information about the heavens from her or not. If she was an enemy, he would crush her. The girl silently absorbed his every word. Unexpectedly for everyone, tears welled up in her eyes. She began to ask with feigned bewilderment why Zenko was talking to her in such a tone, since she had done nothing bad to him. The tears continued to flow, and she repeated how rude it was and how much it hurt her. Eventually, the crying turned into rage. As if in confusion, Zanka looked at the sobbing girl in front of him as Delman crept up with the intention of striking. However, at the very last moment his gaze caught the approaching one, and he managed to dodge, avoiding even the slightest scratch. The annoyed young man asked about the reasons for such behavior. He tried to remind him that they were allies, but as he had expected, the stranger had manipulated him. Delman shouted in anger at him for daring to hurt his girl's feelings. He said that it didn't matter to him. Even if it was his comrades, the boy would never forgive anyone for such a thing. Everyone was confused as they listened to the young man. He continued to say that she was the one he was fighting for. Delman intended to protect her, considering it his duty. Tamsi listened to him silently, objecting that he was mistaken. While the girl could barely contain her glee, the guy realized that he was not being manipulated. He knew that the guy was sincere in his feelings. Tamsi was constantly next to him and was confident in his statements. Gris did not understand what he was talking about and asked to explain the meaning of his words. The girl was lost in thought for a moment, and then, enlightened, she smiled. She asked the boys in amazement why they still hadn't realized what was happening. Gently hugging the strong man, she declared that he had always been her admirer. They were surprised to hear this and asked since when this had started happening. But Tamsi assured them that Delman was not the type to betray his friends out of jealousy. The girl countered by pointing out that Tamsi underestimated what Delman was capable of for Amo. While the girl continued to convince them that there was nothing more to find here and that her intentions were purely peaceful, he prepared his weapon for battle. The lady tried to explain that she only wanted to talk and nothing more. Delman didn't hesitate to activate the Jinki and direct the growing demonic flow towards the boys ready to attack. His shadow loomed over the frightened young men who were initially just looking for information. They had not expected such a turn of events. The situation was becoming more and more dangerous, taking a serious turn. Rudo, overcome with despair, wondered why everything always ended in a fight and blamed himself for what was happening. Suddenly, a voice accusing him of everything made him freeze in bewilderment. He grabbed his head, trying to understand where this voice was coming from. It kept saying that a child with criminal blood was vile, dirty, and would drag everyone down. The stranger suddenly remembered another admirer of Amo among her guests. She announced that the girl wanted them all to spend an eternity of joyful communication with each other, but warned of severe punishment for any disruption to the fun, and the retribution will await Rudo, whom she called a scoundrel, while the guy himself, paralyzed with horror, felt worse and worse. The young man, trembling with fear and covered in sweat, stuttered and asked the apostles about the purpose of their visit, but they silently grabbed him. At that moment, Tamsi screamed at the top of his lungs, trying to bring the boy out of his stupor. Another moment, and they would have been seriously injured, if not killed, by the explosive attack. But the young man managed to pull Rudo away and avoid the worst consequences. Pointing his gun, Delman told them not to dodge his water attack. Tamsi explained that this Jinki ability was a legacy of Delman's past, stemming from his desire to grow giant plants. Being hit by this stream of water causes uncontrollable growth. His Jinki can manipulate the water contained in an object, causing it to absorb moisture like a sponge and swell like a balloon. Tamsi asked Zank if he knew what would happen if a critical amount of water were absorbed into the human body. After a pause, he himself answered that the person would simply explode. Tum was trying to bring back Engine, who had apparently been shot in the back with water. They were puzzled as to how, given the Jinka's striking appearance, he had managed to land a blow without being noticed. Tamsi explained that the effect depended on the attachment used and suggested that Delman was using a silent attachment for a sneak attack. The young man noted that he had not used this in their presence before and was about to say something about the girl, but Ryu interrupted him, asking him to listen. She admitted that she didn't understand what was happening, but she was going to bring Delman to his senses. The girl confidently walked towards the guy, intending to eliminate the source of his anxiety. Zelko warned her against acting alone, emphasizing that Delman was a difficult opponent and that it was necessary to cooperate to avoid casualties. Ryu looked around suspiciously, remembering the girl's words about another ally of Amo. At the moment, she couldn't afford to trust anyone among all those present. Sanko pointed out the danger ahead to Ryu with horror in his eyes. Delman prepared to attack, setting the water pressure to maximum. The impact sent fragments flying off the wall. The girl watched this attack with fascination. She was amazed by the power of Krepish's weapon. She only asked not to destroy Amo's house, otherwise he would have to rebuild everything. Ryu dodged, frozen on the floor in complete immobility, realizing the horror of what had happened. The girl, laughing maliciously, asked if she understood that she would not be able to find out who her ally was, and if she understood how scary it was. The girl reminded him of her previous words about the fun that awaited everyone who would cooperate with Amo. As she said this, the girl was inspired, considering conversations about her pets to be the first step towards peace. The boy understood her madness, but he needed to bring Rudo to his senses. The young man turned to find out what was happening, because they should have been on the surface. Tamsi tried to call the guy, but he did not react, looking at him in shock, as the apostle appeared before his eyes. Lying on the ground in his imagination before the two apostles, he asked in surprise if he had returned to heaven. Rudo's words literally petrified Zenko. He even asked to repeat what was said, because he immediately did not believe his ears. In addition, his nose caught some strange smell. Sniffing, he realized that this scent seemed painfully familiar to him. At this time, Amo asked the young man a question about how, in his opinion, memories are formed in the head. Objects that come into the field of vision, sounds heard, people around and situations that occur are transformed into memories. The girl said with profound confidence that Amo believed that it was all about the smell. At that moment, features painfully reminiscent of Chiva appeared in her. She offered Rudo to smell the familiar scent, if he didn't want to talk about feelings. The boy watched her in surprise. It was as if the real Chiva appeared before him, wanting him to experience the feeling of falling in love. Noticing the girl, he shouted her name, and at that time she took out a soft toy from behind her back and showed it to him. With a radiant smile, glowing with happiness, she hugged the toy to herself, assuring that her heart was filled with joy and that she would always take care of it with love. Hearing these words, Rudo was first dumbfounded with surprise, and then he was overcome with uncontrollable rage mixed with pain. He remembered how she threw this toy on the ground right in front of his eyes and reminded her of this. With a cry of despair, the young man accused her of throwing the toy away right before his eyes, pointing his trembling hand at her. But the bitter truth was that it was only a game of his inflamed consciousness. Instead of Chiva, his comrades and Amo stood before him, although his mind refused to acknowledge it. He was plagued by visions like Delman, and what they saw wasn't a true betrayal. Tamsi felt some memories awakening in them. Probably the reason for this was the mysterious stranger. Hearing their confusion, she anxiously asked what visions they were talking about. Amo sincerely did not understand, because the girl had never shown them anything like that. Swinging that same boot, raising dust from the floor, she admitted that she had only given them the scent. The scent of happy times, the scent of closeness with those dear to their hearts. This scent has become their guiding star and their motivation. It is unique to each person, but once they feel it, they will do anything to protect Amo. The lady suddenly fell silent, realizing that she had blurted out too much. Zank, however, managed to catch the essence of her words and understand the hidden meaning. He and Tamsi began to put on their protection, realizing that this devilish smell would make them see her as the person they adored. The masks were their only chance for salvation, and to avoid this terrible fate, it was enough to simply put them on. The young man looked at the girl with gratitude for her involuntary hint, but he explained that memories intertwined with love do not always bring happiness. Tamsi wondered with interest what would happen to a person if their soul was filled with resentment towards the one they loved. It seemed to him that this could be the end for her, although perhaps these guys had planned to end her life even earlier. The girl was filled with rage, and through clenched teeth she spat out words full of contempt, insulting them as fools, brainless idiots, and considered them pests. Amo reminded them of something she had said earlier. With a sinister look, she declared to the boys that their driving force was the thirst for happy moments. Rudo, still unable to recover from the shock, cowered on the ground, overcome with despair. In his inner world, he was in front of Chiva again. The girl had left him, but the boy's heart did not know forgiveness. But there was something he could not understand. Clutching his head with madness in his eyes, he couldn't understand why the memory of happiness had become so much stronger. Suddenly, in his imagination, two apostles appeared, trying to take Chiva away by force. The girl desperately called for help, begging them to stop, and this cry reached Rudo. She whispered his name, in tears, begging for salvation. Hearing this, the young man beamed with a triumphant smile. In an instant, he was at the girl's side, pushing aside Tamzi and Zanko, the apostles of his imagination. Amo was the same Chiva he had desperately protected in his madness. His friends tried to bring him back to reality, but Rudo, looking at them like apostles, firmly declared that he was no longer who he had been before. Amo couldn't take her eyes off the boy, as if she was enchanted. He, in turn, looked at his hand as if he held in it the strength that would make it impossible for him to lose anyone else. Pointing his finger at the boys with a confident gesture, he proclaimed that this power would become his weapon to crush his enemies. And the girl, deeply moved, only looked at him with tenderness. Her desperate pleas for help were answered not only by Ryu, who promised to protect her and asked her to calm down, but also by Follow and Delman, whose words that it was all over echoed in the air like a sentence. Tamzi, surrounded by his loyal comrades, realized that they had underestimated their strength. It was already late, and the young man desperately resisted the idea of using the Jinki against those he considered close, but they left him no other choice. Hearing this, Zenki looked at him in amazement. A trembling hope was born in Delman's heart that this delicate flower could bloom in this god-forsaken place, and joy filled him. With sincere gratitude in her voice, the girl addressed him, emphasizing that it was only thanks to his tireless work that she had the chance to see this miracle of nature. However, a fire of desire burned in the guy's soul. One flower was not enough for him, and he wanted to turn their house into a blooming garden for the sake of that very one. Amma was delighted to share the news of the incredible turnout of her fans. She looked very pleased. The only question that occupied her was whether these two would join the others or would prefer to remain boars. With a determined movement, Tamzi activated the Jinki Tokushin, and with a dull thud on the ground, the hilt began the inevitable. He was ready for anything. Delman, Ryu, Rudo, and Follow, driven by an indomitable loyalty, vowed to never let Amo's pain be repeated. Without hesitation, they rushed to the attack to protect her from this new danger. However, the untied ropes of the Jinka, as if alive, stood up to defend themselves, not allowing the guys to get closer and harm Tamzi. In the blink of an eye, each of the boys was entangled in ropes, restricting their movements in unexpected captivity. Their faces reflected amazement and confusion at the sudden turn of events. The whole room was immersed in a chaotic interweaving of ropes, as if everything was in a web. Amo, amazed by what she saw, anxiously asked what it was and what was happening around her. There was desperation in her voice as she looked at the room filled with these sinister threads. She pleaded with the boys, asking them to do something, not realizing that they themselves were victims, helplessly bound hand and foot, unable to move or change anything. The guy warned that any sudden movement would only worsen their situation. The more actively they tried to break free, the more the ropes would cut into their flesh. With sincere remorse, he asked for forgiveness from everyone. Clutching his head, he muttered that he had hoped that the pain would bring them back to clarity of thought. But his calculations had been wrong. In despair, Amo began to accuse everyone around her of heartlessness. She screamed that Tamzi was ready to sacrifice his friends for a crazy experiment, regardless of their suffering, but his plan was not destined to come true. They would fight for freedom, despite the hellish pain, even if blood was shed. The young man explained that his jinks were yarn winders. He asked her if she knew the purpose of this simple stick, and without waiting for an answer, he himself revealed its secret. Tamzi explained that its essence was in winding a rope. With one wave of his hand, he set the Jinki in motion. All the guys who were under the influence of this girl were wound with threads as if in a cocoon, created thanks to the efforts of the young man who owned the Jinka, who announced the end of the fun winding. Glancing at the same girl, he declared his work on the completely insane woman complete. She was hanging upside down, her limbs bound with ropes, looking exhausted. Tamzi, addressing her, demanded that the boys be immediately returned to their original, normal state, while she herself was in a suspended position. Standing next to the bound captives, Zanko felt a surrealism bordering on awkwardness. He complained about his usual uselessness, but the boy countered, claiming that this was not true. From the boy's point of view, the mere knowledge that there was more than one opponent was already creating a noticeable tension. Gris, relieved, approached Tum, expressing genuine joy that she had managed to protect her face with the mask. He asked worriedly how Engine was feeling. The girl bowed down to the unconscious young man and replied that he was still unconscious. She put a mask on him as well, as if trying to protect him from the impending disaster. Now they had to get him to the medics. Tamsi, lost in thought, stared at one point. In despair, Amma was tormented by unbearable pain, screaming out her agony over and over again. He just silently looked at her suffering. Never before had she experienced such cruelty, and these tormentors seemed to her the embodiment of evil, which she tirelessly repeated. In a fit of despair, the girl cried out for help and, like a clap of thunder, her plea reached the consciousness of the boys, awakening her influence in them. Zanko was convinced that, despite all her words, they were not even able to move. But suddenly, obeying her call, they began to violently tear themselves from their bonds, raising columns of dust. Panic gripped Tamsi and Zanko as they heard Delmon's threatening voice predicting their imminent death if he was released. The young man, overcome with anger, lost patience. He realized that persuasion was powerless. Striking his staff on the ground, he promised to free them. But the ropes only squeezed their bodies with new force and furious speed, plunging Delmon into complete bewilderment. He tied them even tighter, turning them into a single lump that made a hole in the floor. At a dizzying speed, they rushed down floor after floor, leaving behind a gaping hole and destroying everything in their path. Zanko, clutching the rocks convulsively, almost fell into the abyss. The realization of what had happened pierced him with a chilling horror, and he whispered that his friend had crossed all boundaries. Tamsi, having descended to the place where the victims had fallen, smoothed his hair with feigned carelessness, and smugly declared that everything was now fine. The young man who followed him lashed out at Tamsi, asking how he could consider this a good outcome when he had nearly taken the lives of his comrades. His angry outburst was interrupted by a joyful cry from the girl watching from above. She asked if they understood that it was because of their alienation from Amo that the tragedy occurred. Even if a person tries to hide his true nature, it will still find a way out and break through all barriers. Rudo, impaled on the rebar, desperately tried to free himself, while Amo screamed that they were the worst and that everyone would die because of them. All this was proof of their complete incompatibility for her. Zanko watched silently, and a sudden surprise appeared on Tamsi's face. He thought that the guy had forgotten something important, and the realization of this made him grin. With great difficulty, Rudo pulled out the reinforcement, leaving a bleeding wound on his body. The young man explained that even if his comrades were seriously injured, there was no need to worry and was going to reveal the reason for this strange calm. It's all about the talisman drawn on their bodies. Tamsi asked Zanko if he remembered how Remlin drew them. Suddenly, a figure appeared behind Amo. The girl turned around and saw Engin, who had come to his senses and was holding her boot and declaring that he would confiscate it. The lady, deep in thought, studied the documents intently. Judging by the photograph, they belonged to Rudo. Her boss suddenly walked in and optimistically declared that the boys would easily get the information they needed about the border. The girl thought that with such a team composition, there should be no problems. However, Corvus noticed her depressed state and carefully asked if it was connected with what was hidden inside Rudo. Her eyes widened in amazement, and she froze in complete bewilderment, not knowing how to answer this question. He asked her with a devilish grin in his eyes if she could share what she saw in Rudo when she first met him, as if he was anticipating her answer. Engin said that it irritated him when a sock was worn only on one foot. Suddenly, something caught his attention, tearing him out of the depths of irritation, and he froze in amazement. The girl, kneeling without a second pair of boots, was not wearing socks at all, and it was this unexpected revelation that caused such a shock in him. With a mad, desperate plea in her eyes, she demanded that the thing that belonged to Amo be returned and desperately tried to reach the frightened young man. He promised that he understood everything and would certainly return her loss. Amo, blazing with anger, begged Engin not to touch her shoes, afraid that the smell of that very person would disappear. The guy looked at the shoes in complete bewilderment, then looked inside to smell the smell. His face twisted in disgust, and he pulled his hand with the boot away. He asked in amazement how she could wear it. Suddenly, understanding flashed, and he asked anxiously if it would hurt him. The lady only demanded with renewed vigor that he stop sniffing them and called him the worst. She demanded her treasure back again and again, Fall was amazed and could not believe that Engine had recovered so quickly and was amazed at the miraculous power of the talisman. Tom explained that the healing had happened when she was trying to patch him up, and then he pretended to be asleep and begged her not to tell anyone about it. Engine reiterated that he was willing to give her the shoes back, but only if she lifted the spell, restoring everyone to sanity. In response, she made a bitter remark about Amo's inability to smell without one foot. Now that no one will be there to protect her, everything will sink back into the ordinary. Delman, as if awakening from a nightmare, could barely comprehend the chaos around him. His eyes wandered, searching for answers, finding none in the ruins. Tamsi was relieved to see the talisman, the fruit of Remlin's efforts, working successfully. They approached the confused Delman, sensing his confusion. Questions swarmed in his head, demanding immediate explanations. The young man, with sincere joy at seeing him conscious, assured him that Amo had only temporarily deprived him of clarity of thought. This scent that she gave them awakened warm memories of loved ones in the guise. That is why Delman and his friends immediately felt a special sympathy for her, as if she was dear to them. Hearing this, the guy was very surprised at first, but then disappointment came and he realized that the girl from his memories would not return to life. Zalko understood that Emo had an unusual and unpleasant gift. If a person lost someone important to him, then the memories of happy moments with them were incredibly vivid and painful than all the others. Even if the guys were able to return, reality would still remain harsh. When everyone came to their senses, they had to put on masks. The guy returned the girl's boot, and she greedily snatched it from Engine's hands and hurried away. Zanko, expressing obvious dissatisfaction, asked what he was doing. He emphasized that even if he failed to obtain the information and they left, the danger emanating from this girl would still remain, and it was impossible to simply close one's eyes to it. The young man objected that despite this, she was just a weak girl who only had Jinky. He was not going to deprive her of her treasure, but would try to convince her not to harm others. The girl began to complain about her miserable life and destroyed home, wailing and asking if they themselves were not ashamed. These words made Zanko angry and irritated. He was outraged by such impudence. At that moment, Rudo began to take off his mask, and the young man noticed how he moved away. The girl shared her thoughts with the boss about the fact that she had seen quite a few people, about what was in the young man that distinguished him from the others, and it was not about his Jinky. The reason was something else. Amo noticed Rudo take off his mask and approach her. She asked him if he liked her scent so much that he was looking at her so fascinated, but he just stared at her frozen. He was silent for a couple of seconds, not taking his eyes off her, and then suddenly clenched his fist and hit her, knocking her off her feet. She was taken aback at first, and then looked at him in bewilderment and asked what it was. The guy with a crazy expression on his face stood over her, ready to strike again. The young man began to beat her furiously, and Amo could do nothing to resist, only took the blows. She was terrified by the thought of what was growing inside Rudo. In simple words, something was growing inside him that could destroy everything around him. The young man completely lost his mind and was going to continue beating the girl without stopping, but they tried to stop him. Everyone stood there in amazement, unable to comprehend the sudden change in him. Fall desperately called his name, but there was only stunned silence in response. He called for him to stop and come to his senses, explaining that he had gone too far. Amo lay prostrate on the ground, her face, torn from blows, bleeding, and traces of recent tears betrayed unbearable pain. Fall tried to get through to his mind and explain that they had understood the essence of her ability and that there was no need for a brutal and cruel beating of the girl. The guy sincerely hoped that his words were understood, but in response, the young man heard only a question about what if his enemy is a woman. Rudo asked him if he should let her kill his friends, not having the right to protect them. He wanted to know what to do if the enemy is a woman, and whether he had the right to fight her back. There was madness in his eyes. He was obsessed with only one thought. The young man declared that he could not live bound by such rules. Fall tried to explain to him that he didn't mean it that way. He just wanted to say that she was defenseless against him, but in response he got a cold retort that she wasn't defenseless and that she was a giver. Rudo said in an angry voice that it was Amo who had plunged them into this chaos, and it was important to remember that she had not just attacked them, but had also tormented their souls, penetrating into their most secret memories. Frozen in front of the girl's motionless body, he was convinced that he was right, believing that she deserved this cruel retribution. Injin, keeping silent, listened to his thoughts and answered that he understood him. He asked about further actions to obtain the necessary information from her. Rudo's gaze fell on Amo, and he was pierced by the terrible thought that he could have killed her. He looked at Injin, recognizing his terrible mistake, and the realization of the tragic consequences of this act made him go cold, and his body began to sweat. The young man tenderly embraced the boy and headed for the exit, wanting to talk to him alone. At the same time, he asked Tum to take care of the wounded Amo, and the girl was understanding of his request and agreed to help. After they had settled in, Rudo, consumed by guilt, sank into a painful silence, only occasionally glancing at his older comrade. Engine remained unperturbed and sighed quietly, as if finding solace in the silence itself. Unable to bear the oppressive silence any longer, the boy himself broke it, asking the reason for his silence. In response, he heard that any word would be superfluous, since he himself had already understood the full depth of his offense. They both knew that Rudo had abandoned his original goal, allowing emotions to prevail over reason. Each word was difficult for him to say, but he said that the whole time he was on top, he was gritting his teeth, not allowing himself to give in to anger. The guy was told not to get angry at people and just endure. But the fall down opened his eyes that holding back is equal to defeat. The pain of past events still tormented him when he admitted that, having found himself at the bottom, he again stepped onto an old, well-known path. Before Rudo curbed his temper, he was a vessel that poured out darkness on everyone around him in rage. It seemed that nothing had changed. Whether the boy was at the top or at the bottom, he felt like the same boy, just grown in size. Engine listened attentively to his outpourings and replied that he liked good women. He admired women whose intellect surpassed his own, women with beautiful bodies, sensual and responsive. He wondered if he was asking too much. The young man was not a fan of those girls who found pleasure in the pain and suffering of others, who remained a child at heart. Turning to Rudo, he asked if his words would anger any woman who heard them. Engine bitterly admitted that his problem was that he was completely unable to hide his true feelings. Even mature people found new horizons for themselves, and the young man sincerely believed that self-knowledge was the key to personal growth. He had long since come to terms with his weaknesses and hoped that Rudo would also be able to find the strength to do so. The boy, enchanted by his words, listened to every word, and at the end of their conversation his friend thoughtfully said that each of them had something to strive for. Without taking his eyes off him, he drilled Engine with his piercing gaze as if trying to look into his very soul. He in turn suggested finding the courage to apologize a little later. Tom tried to explain to Amo that they had not intended to go this far, and her heart was breaking with regret. The girl remained silent, lost in her thoughts, not responding with a word. Dropping her mask, she gave the girl a weak smile and promised to listen to her as much as she needed, and even share gossip with her. With a quiet sadness in her voice, Amo said that she would have made a wonderful mother. In response, she only hesitantly admitted that perhaps there was some truth in those words. The lady shared her memories of her loving mother thanks to her mom and dad. She met her first love and the treasure of Amo was given to her. Sitting in front of the children, she confidentially told them that she was lucky enough to see an angel who freely moved between heaven and this world. At first, Amo's words seemed incomprehensible to Tom, but soon understanding lit up her face, followed by amazement. She glanced at her comrades, who shared her amazement. The girl asked Amo to repeat what he had said. A little girl wandering through dark alleys noticed a black bird sitting high above her. She told her mother about the encounter over and over again, admiring its black fluffy plumage and finding it incredibly cute. The mother tried to explain to her daughter that the black bird could not return her love and asked her to be silent. Her words wounded Amo to the very heart, and in a fit of anger she screamed at the bird, promising to hate it. The woman gently asked her daughter to leave the bird alone and follow her. The girl looked at her mother in surprise and asked where they were going. She replied that they were going to a place where she would be truly loved. Wandering through narrow alleys, they finally reached the right place where a stranger was waiting for them. Amo stared at him, stunned, not understanding anything. The little girl looked anxiously at her mother, waiting for at least a word. The woman, with a feigned smile, assured her daughter that she was incredibly happy for her. If she had not found this man, then perhaps no one would have loved Amo. Now, finally, happiness awaits her, and the mother's heart rejoiced at this thought. The girl's face brightened as if the sun had come out from behind the clouds. She asked with hope in her voice if he would love her forever. The man took her away, and on the way the girl couldn't help but ask where they were going. In response, he said that there was one special place created just for her, a place where no one could disturb them, their own secluded corner. When they arrived, a huge building towered before them. Amo, amazed, could not believe her eyes, thinking that this was some kind of ridiculous joke. But the stranger sternly explained that it was impossible to leave here, because there was an unimaginable danger lurking outside. Her heart ached with the desire to show this wonderful house to her mother and wanted to share her joy with her. But the man interrupted her dreams, cruelly informing her that her mother would no longer be around. From now on, this place is her new home. Madness flashed in the man's eyes. He looked at the girl, who still did not understand what was happening, and told her that he would protect her, feed her, and live with her forever. Amo saw the piles of photo albums and couldn't hide her amazement. She was increasingly surprised looking at the endless supplies of food and clothing. The girl wanted to know if he had bought all of this himself. The man replied that he had, because as a hired worker, he didn't have to worry about tomorrow. But then something broke inside him and he desperately began to convince himself of the truth of his words, until, broken, he collapsed to the ground. Clutching his head, the man screamed that even if it was true, all the carriers despised him. It seemed to him that he did not understand the reason, or simply refused to accept it, because outwardly he was an ordinary person. This was terrible for him, because he was once respected at work. Amo, stunned, watched in silence. He, as if in delirium, began repeating her name and asked if she knew that this room was created for a special ritual. With a mad gleam in his eyes, he proclaimed that they were obliged to spend it together forever. The girl gave him an empty look, lost in her thoughts. With a trembling voice, she turned to him, explaining that her heart was pounding wildly during the ritual, and it was unbearably hard for her. The man froze in a daze. Then, with a sinister smile, he said that all this was a manifestation of great love. The words about love struck Amo. She remembered a book in which the heroine's heart beat just as hard because she was in love with a prince. The man confirmed her guess, claiming that she, like that girl, was in love with him. Amo froze, not knowing what to answer, and suddenly it dawned on her she understood everything. Her heart fluttered. The girl believed that it was love and was an unearthly bliss. After the so-called ritual, lying on her back, she gazed thoughtlessly at the sky through the ruined wall. Then her gaze turned to the gentleman, who was holding his boots tightly to his face. He was her first love, opening up previously unknown feelings for her. This made her chuckle quietly from the happiness that had enveloped her. Suddenly the door creaked open. Amo, in amazement, raised her head and tried to see the uninvited guest. The man, no less surprised, asked who they were. The silhouette of a stranger appeared in the doorway, hiding his face under a mask, and he only muttered an apology. Without explaining the purpose of their visit, the strangers unceremoniously entered the room. They began to examine every object, which caused the man's anger, and he asked what they were doing here, and who allowed them to barge in like that. The strangers remained silent, which only increased the man's irritation. He emphasized that this place belonged to him and Amo, and angrily demanded an explanation. Jumping to his feet, overcome with rage, he was going to kill them if they did not disappear immediately. He straightened up, ready for a fight. The man was determined to destroy the intruders, beat them to death with his jinx, and threateningly showed them off. But they, like stone statues, silently watched him, and one of them separated from his comrade. He approached so quickly that the man barely had time to notice him approaching. He saw the fist flying at his face, but did not have time to dodge, and took the blow. A powerful blow knocked him down, leaving no chance for resistance. Amo, overcome with horror, rose up and looked in amazement at the stranger, who in the meantime began to take off the man's shoes. While she was watching what was happening, a shadow hung over her, and the girl, not understanding what was happening, looked up at the stranger. Standing silently before her, he extended his hand as if asking for something important to be placed in that palm. His companion, instantly understanding the unspoken request, carefully handed him the very boots he had taken from the fallen man. He held them out forward without making a sound. Bowing down before the astonished Amo, handing her the shoes, he quietly said that they would suit her better. The girl just looked at them, speechless, and he continued to explain, saying that these boots would help heal the gaping wound in her heart. At first, she instinctively pressed her hands to her chest in fear. But then, obeying an unknown force, she loosened her grip and timidly extended her palms. The stranger silently placed the shoes in her hands and, without saying a word, passed by. Looking up at the sky through the gaping hole in the wall, he said that it was as if that very place was very close. Extending his hand to his comrade, he called him to follow him. Standing with his back to her, the stranger shared that until the right time came, he would lend her these boots and asked her to use them carefully. Amo, without saying a word from the very beginning, looked at him enchanted and tears rolled down her cheeks. Something unearthly with huge wings stood in front of her, and the girl thought it was an angel. Suddenly, this mysterious stranger simply stepped out through the hole in the wall. The flapping of his wings created a vortex of wind, causing Amo to cover her face with her hands, her hair flying in chaos. Walking to the wall, she watched in fascination as the angel rose higher and higher. The girl watched them with boundless joy. The sound of footsteps was heard from behind. It turned out that the gentleman had come to his senses, and she turned around and saw him. With the naive spontaneity of a child, Amo began to ask if he had seen those angels, real ones, not painted ones, and then, remembering the blow, she became worried about his wounds. In a rage, he pushed the girl away, shouting that they were his shoes and accusing her of stealing them. The man was beside himself with anger, insisting that he would never allow someone like her to touch his things. Amo froze in horror, and her eyes reflected only all-consuming fear. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, he rained down kicks on her, accompanying them with insults, calling her a thief and a piece of trash. With hatred in his voice, the gentleman shouted questions about how many times she had to be told before she got it, and when it would happen. Even if her senses were dulled, even if she had lost the ability to feel anything, a new, unfamiliar noise was born in her heart. She assumed it was because of these boots, and suddenly realized that they seemed to be made for her. They fit her perfectly, and that meant only one thing. They were hers now. From that moment on, she swore that she would never give them to anyone. Amo cast a withering glance at her master. Injin and Rudo joined the others, and the young man asked for permission to talk with noticeable hesitation. Falo, surprised by his appearance, asked where he had been, and immediately blurted out that the girl had finally spoken. She told him about the information they had been desperately searching for so long. The boy's eyes widened with incredible surprise and hope when he heard this. A frightening and alien aura emanated from Amo. Then the man, feeling a change in her, anxiously asked how this was even possible and why it happened to her. His jinx, contrary to all logic, responded to her, which was completely unthinkable, because they should be inextricably linked only to the user. The man was tormented by doubts about why they responded to someone else. Amo, clutching the shoes tightly in her hand, answered him that perhaps they did not belong to him in the first place, and that might be the reason. The girl did not know what jinx were, but she felt that they suited her perfectly and, most importantly, they filled the gaping void in her heart. With them, she felt as if a missing part of herself had been found, as if a dead battery had come to life again, filling her with energy. After listening to her, the man smiled, slowly approached, and tried to snatch the shoes from her hands. He said that you can't steal other people's things. The gentleman tried to explain that the girl did not understand basic things and asked if she understood his words. But she only asked in bewilderment what he was talking about, because he had stolen these things from someone at some point. Moreover, she was a good girl, and the angel confirmed that these boots suited her perfectly, and that should be enough. The gentleman, with growing aggression, demanded to explain what was going on. He was unable to comprehend the reason for her disobedience, as if he had dug his boots with pincers. The question was growing in his head that she would really no longer obey him. The girl explained through a storm of emotions that a whole ocean of feelings was raging in her soul. She tried to seem strong, but irritation was breaking through the mask of courage. However, the main thing that tormented her was an uncontrollable desire to do something terrible. Clenching her jinx until her knuckles turned white, she made her first and last selfish request, that he give her those boots. The puzzled girl asked if these shoes were so important to him. His gaze, full of amazement, darted between her and the boots. And suddenly, like a beast, he shouted with furious rage that he would never give up these jinks. The man, irritated by her pleas, coldly snapped that no amount of asking would make him give in. She had become a burden to him, and he demanded that she return the boots immediately. Amo couldn't help but scream in despair, trying to understand the reason for his refusal. It was her only request, and she wanted to know why he couldn't listen to her if he loved her. In an attempt to move away from her, he swung his leg roughly. But she stood her ground, clutching tightly to his boots and pushing him away with desperate force. In response, he lost control and grabbed her hair. Rage and pain burst out of them in screams as they continued this brutal fight. Unexpectedly taking advantage of the moment, she delivered a blow that threw him through the gap in the wall. In horror, realizing that he would fall, the man clung to the edge, trying to hold on, but Amo seemed not to notice him and did not react. Only when she looked down, she saw that he had already flown halfway, and her heart sank with fear. The next moment, she saw only a scarlet spot. She couldn't understand how everything turned into a tragedy. Questions tormented her. The girl wanted to know what Amo's life was like and what life awaited her. The girl wondered why she ended up here and why her mother gave her to him. Suddenly, the thought struck her that she had been sold. She desperately tried to cast aside this terrible guess, to convince herself of the falsity of this assumption, and invented her own truth. It was all about love. Amo brought the boots to her face, inhaling their scent. The scent was the epitome of a beautiful first love from a man she could never forget. An unknown force awakened deep within her soul. Now she wanted to meet more people in the desert, and wanted different personalities to love her. After months of wandering across the vast expanses, the heavens opened, and angels appeared before the girl's eyes. In her story, the angel appeared only once. While she was enthusiastically drawing something on the ground, those gathered listened to her every word, spellbound. Gris was at a loss as to how they had appeared out of nowhere, and Tum, with a heavy heart, imagined how hard these days had been for her. Zenko, however, was distrustful of the angels, believing them to be nothing more than grievers with wings. Tamsi wrote it all off as hallucinations, considering Amo to be insane, and Ryu asked how they had overcome the boundaries, to which the girl replied that they probably flew thanks to their wings. Tamsi, inquiring about the time of their return, received an answer from Amo, who was drawing. She said that those angels returned about a month ago. The young man, remembering this date, looked meaningfully at Rudo. Rudo's appearance left much to be desired, and the boy noted with bitterness that it was at that time that Rudo appeared. This information filled him with horror. Silently, with a blank look, he approached Amo to see her drawing. Seeing the image, he realized that it was them, and asked if it was so. Already knowing the answer, he grinned, realizing that the angels had come specifically to them. Rudo took this news with grim gratitude. He didn't care whether these creatures had come for him or not. If they existed, he would hunt them down. At any cost, the young man would learn about the way to get up and why they had killed Legto, and then force them to tell the truth. In his mind, the angels were already dead, both bleeding at Leiko's tombstone. He wanted retribution, for them to pay the full price for what they had done. Amo, looking at Rudo, realized that he had suffered the same fate as her. His heart, like hers, had become human thanks to those ill-fated gloves. She felt that their things resonated perfectly with their emotional wounds. This taught the girl not to drown out the huge emptiness in her heart with other people's things, because her own were more than enough for this. The feelings inherent in every mortal awakened in her, but when she became human, she realized something important. Amo, choking with tears, admitted that she finally understood what the gentleman was doing to her and how unbearably lonely it was to be alone. Wiping away her tears, she whispered that she dreamed of being needed by someone, but she was paralyzed by fear of leaving this barren desert. So Amo waited for someone to come to her and hoped to try to build relationships with people. Trying to calm down, she covered her face with her hands and added bitterly that nothing had worked out as it should have. She realized that Rudo had come to ask for her forgiveness and asked if that was true, but without letting him say a word, Amo bitterly admitted that there was no point in it, because she was exactly the same as him. Most likely, everyone around was mired in anger, ready to raise their hand at any moment to harm, and from this hopelessness it seemed that the world would not change. Enchanted by her words, Rudo found the strength to speak. Crouching down in front of her, he extended his hand to her and asked her to join forces to try to change this world together. Rudo's voice trembled with despair as he looked down and admitted that he didn't know how to do it, but he had hope that together they could find a way. The whole company had already gathered outside, ready to set out. The guys anxiously asked her if she was sure of her decision to stay, and she sadly confirmed that she needed to be alone to sort out the thoughts that were tormenting her soul. Her only wish was to share her experiences occasionally, and she approached Rudo with this request. He only modestly agreed. She stood alone, watching the boys leave. Only their silhouettes were visible in the distance, and soon the desert would have mercilessly swallowed them up, leaving only emptiness. The guys set off in their car, leaving this zone. Unfortunately, they did not learn information about how to cross the border, but at least they learned something that would be useful to them somehow. They knew stories about angels who knew the way across the border, and about Jinki, whose symbols were similar to those worn by Rudo. It suddenly occurred to Ria that the boys' shoes and gloves could belong to the very series the Vandals were talking about. The young man himself looked out the window with sadness and thoughtfulness. As Amo was about to enter the house, standing in front of the door, an ominous shadow appeared behind her. Sensing something was wrong, she turned around in fear. There really was a stranger standing behind her, and anxiety squeezed her heart. With a trembling voice, she asked who he was and what he wanted. As soon as they entered, the silence was pierced by her desperate cries, begging for him to stop and return what was taken. The rage that filled the boy was directed at Amo. He took it out on her by beating her up. His anger was so great that the thought of the presence of these angelic bastards threatened to spill over into uncontrollable rage. Jabber was aware of the ruthlessness of the desert, but even in this harsh place he managed to find his own, albeit peculiar, benefit. Everyone wondered why Engine was driving. The answer was simple, because if it were anyone else, the guy would have fallen asleep long ago. Looking at Gris, he remembered that he was a dangerous driver, and everyone understood that if they had fallen off the cliff, he would not have even flinched. During the trip, the car hit a huge bump, jumping up so hard that the impact on landing was painful throughout the body. The engine didn't care, but the rest of the passengers in the car were shaken too hard, and no one was prepared for that. Unable to bear it, they began to shout at the boy for his reckless driving. In response, he only made excuses, blaming the terrain. From the strong blow, Ryu's wounds responded with sharp pain, and Rudo realized that the Remlin talisman was not able to heal such minor injuries. He asked if the talisman healed fatal wounds, and remembered how the girl said that it did. Moreover, these were injuries inflicted by TMZ, and nothing could be done about it. The guy himself regretted it. Still, since they had entered the Forbidden Zone, visiting a doctor seemed a reasonable step. Luck was on their side, and they decided to immediately take advantage of the opportunity to heal their wounds. Rudo's gaze settled on the familiar surroundings. Every alley was familiar to him. A vague premonition crept into his soul because of the upcoming visit to the doctor. Having burst into the office without knocking, the guys announced their return to a woman whose appearance rather spoke of the masculine principle. The meeting was devoid of any cordiality. Through her displeasure, she asked about the purpose of their visit, reminding them of her busy schedule. Rudo recognized her as the same old man, but quickly corrected himself by calling her a lady. The dissatisfied patient was indignant at her loud voice, complaining of ringing in his ears and begging for silence during treatment. In response, the doctor unleashed a stream of abuse on him, accusing him of being too noisy and demanding humility. The doctor was grumbling angrily about the upcoming visit of her grandchildren, complaining about the lack of peace. Having finished her work, she demanded payment and wanted to leave the office immediately. The patient, unable to restrain himself, called her an old hag and promised never to return. The guy realized that because of her obnoxious nature, she rarely had visitors, but she angrily declared that she was not going to accommodate these complainers. Injin often visited her when they were in the area and seemed to like people with such a character. They understood that this lady was extraordinary and outstanding. The woman was a very famous doctor, who had been involved in the creation of the cure for body pollution since the very beginning of the project. One day, while studying a contaminated sample, she accidentally swallowed it, and her high-pitched voice is a side effect. It probably affected her hearing or something, but in any case, she was considered an oddball. The woman shouted an order to listen to her, introduced herself as Alice Stilza, and demanded to remember this. When Rudo heard her name, he was lost in thought, but his thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the loud cries of a young man. It turned out to be Grandma's grandson, August, who declared to the whole house that sweets were simply disgusting. Aisha, hugging her brother, gently reminded him of the need to be more tactful. Noticing the boys, she was surprised at the same time as August, and they both asked what they were doing in the hospital. Everyone present was amazed that the three of them turned out to be a family. Alice's grandchildren tried to visit her at every opportunity. They lost their parents early, and now learned the basics of medicine from their grandmother. The woman indignantly declared that she would not give the guy a single candy if he continued to complain. After the treatment, Aisha was a little tired and the boys had to go back. August was eager to ride in their car, although they had a motorcycle. He enthusiastically asked how they felt in the restricted area and how his masks worked. Tamsi replied that they were a little uncomfortable and suggested taking a closer look. The boy warned that the shadows would soon arrive and that they'd better get away from this dump. Engine waved him off, saying they'd figure it out themselves. The brother and sister said goodbye and sped away on their motorcycle, leaving behind a cloud of dust. Zenko guessed that they were probably heading home. Rudo was lost in his thoughts. Suddenly the sky seemed to move and objects began to fall to the ground. Injin explained that sometimes such garbage rains happen and the path of the heavens is more or less known, so there are special safe zones to protect against this. This garbage from the sky killed many. Rudo watched this horror in shock. Tamsi noticed that, because of such things, the number of people who hate the sky only grows. And the saddest thing was that even if someone wanted to take revenge and rise up, he would not be able to from beyond the border and would simply die. Ryu found all this amazing, namely Rudo himself and these so-called angels. She wondered how they managed to cross this border. The guy, deep in thought, said that he seemed to have seen something at this border, although he wasn't 100% sure. At first, Tamsi didn't understand what kind of incredible thing they told him and asked to repeat it, explaining everything in more detail. The guy said that his memories were mixed up, but he saw some kind of black hole and couldn't understand what it was. Engin's device vibrated, and he realized that it was him who answered. Hearing Semyu's voice asking where they were, the guy asked what happened and replied that they were coming back and would tell him what they had learned. The girl reported that at the moment they were being bothered by some parasites. It turned out that there were armed people standing in front of their base, clearly with bad intentions. Rudo asked what they were talking about, although the young man himself did not understand what kind of backdoor they were talking about, or what kind of parasites, and did not understand what had happened at all. Engin found it strange that the parasites themselves had disturbed the scavengers, as this had never happened before. Hearing this, the boy realized that they were talking about black beetles, and asked if he was right, to which he received confirmation. Many weapons were ready and loaded. The base was attacked by black beetles, who called themselves marauders. The bandits were jubilant as their shot had hit its mark. They had come for the Skyman, having warned the scavengers in advance of the futility of resistance, hinting at their weakened position. There were sinister smiles on their faces, as if they were anticipating the inevitable success of the operation. Confident in the outcome of the attack, they hoped to take possession of what they wanted without hindrance. Engin kept his cool and declared his reluctance to engage in conflict, citing his recent return from the restricted area. Despite this, the looters continued to escalate the situation, preparing weapons and threatening the scavengers. The invaders warned that if they refused to hand over the Celestial, their base would be filled with new breaches. They threatened to wipe them off the face of the earth for disobedience. A voice suddenly spoke up, expressing surprise that the parasites were even aware of any deals. She didn't know the source of their information, but she knew that the bandits' direct attack looked strange, although it didn't matter. The guy said that they never hid their intentions. However, this was a lie. They served only as a diversionary tactic, and it is unknown how many agents had already infiltrated the base while they were stalling for time. Semiyu said she was joking, which puzzled the man, who asked her to avoid such jokes. The girl asked what kind of breaches the looters were talking about. When the smoke cleared, the man was surprised to find that the base was intact and unharmed, despite the recent attack. Behind him, he saw his exhausted comrades and asked in confusion what they were doing there, since they had been ordered to get inside. They replied that they had failed to complete the task because of the impenetrable protection. The watcher felt a new attack and felt fear. Permission was required to enter, since the perimeter was protected by the most powerful defenses. Semiyu opened the doors and greeted the bandits with a declaration that guests were unwelcome and that vermin needed to be gotten rid of. She asked the stunned raiders why they were frozen in indecision. Adjusting her glasses and showing no sign of fear, the girl confidently declared her desire to see the limits of her attacker's capabilities. These words enraged the men, and one of them declared that she had asked for it and shot her. Semiyu froze for a moment, analyzing the situation. With astonishing ease, as if time had slowed down, she dodged, calmly caught the projectile with her hand, and threw it forcefully back towards the attackers. The black beetles were numb with horror as they saw their own weapons flying back, and an explosion occurred a moment later. This sight enraged the bandits, and they opened fire again. As before, Semiyu effortlessly dodged all the bullets, moving with effortless grace. She instantly approached one of the men, who was already in a cold sweat, realizing the full horror of what was happening. With one swing of her leg, the girl crushed him in the chin and then continued to finish him off, deftly dodging the shots of his comrades. Semiyu deprived all the parasites of the ability to attack, and in the blink of an eye, they all lay on the ground. One of the men, overcome with horror, croaked with the last of his strength that she was too strong. Adjusting her glasses haughtily, she advised the marauders to use something more painful and unpredictable next time if they wanted to attack her. Her words were interrupted by a voice calling the girl away. It was Engine who, as expected, knew that the girl could handle everything herself. For Semiyu, they were just a bunch of idiots, and losing would be a disgrace for several generations to come. Grabbing one of the black beetles, she asked how they knew about the location of the Celestial. She did not continue the interrogation, since she already had her own guesses, and Engine understood what was being discussed. He suggested that perhaps the time had come and looked strangely at Rudo. The man, who looked ominous, had already decided that it was time to act.